Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Tove Tunnies. Tove Tunnies was born in May 20, 2001, in Sweden. She grew up in the small suburban town of Vetlanda. Home to just over 10 residents, Vetlanda is a quiet place where everyone knows each other, and incidents of crime are very rare, making any unusual event a topic of local interest. A few years before the tragic events, Tove decided to pursue her studies at a university in a larger city about 200 kilometers away. Enrolling in the medical faculty, however, by 2022, she realized that this career path was not right for her. To take some time to reflect and possibly consider a different field, she decided to take a year off and move back in with her family while living with her parents and twin sister. Tove quickly found a job as a substitute teacher at a local school. This role allowed her to support herself, and she soon moved into a rental apartment. Tove excelled as a teacher, forming strong connections with her students and earning high regard from her colleagues and supervisors. Known for her cheerful demeanor, she was not only recognized as a teacher, but also as an enthusiastic football player, having played for the local football club since childhood, just like her twin sister. On Saturday, October 15, 2022, Tove went to a nightclub that featured a bar, bowling, and live music, hoping to have a fun night with her friends. While there, she unexpectedly ran into two acquaintances, Johanna Jansen, who was 20, and Maya Hellman, who was 18. Tove and Maya had been close friends for a while, having met at a mutual friend's party a few years earlier. Since then, they often went dancing together. Johanna was sociable and popular, with many friends, while Maya was more reserved but still well-liked. Johanna was also Maya's best friend, and Tove had become part of their close circle, despite their friendship. The dynamics among the three girls were often unpredictable. There was a noticeable tension between Tove and Johanna, stemming from a past incident in 2019 when they both unknowingly dated the same guy. After discovering the truth, they had a fight but eventually reconciled. However, the memory of that situation lingered, especially when jealousy over boys at parties arose, creating a sense of rivalry between them. Maya often played the peacemaker, helping to resolve conflicts, but tensions would resurface. In the summer of 2021, Tove and Johanna decided to reassess their friendship and let go of past grievances. They started spending more time together, enjoying walks and conversations. Unfortunately, this peaceful phase was short-lived, as by early 2022, disagreements arose again, primarily about boys. Maya recalled this as their most significant fight. Consequently, their communication broke down once more, and they only began talking again in the fall of 2022. Although their relationship still felt strained at the nightclub, initially, they engaged in casual conversation for a couple of hours. By midnight, Maya realized she had lost track of Johanna and Tove and asked the bartender for help. It turned out that Johanna and Tove had stepped outside and were involved in a loud argument around 1 a.m. They returned to the club just as it was starting to close, and all patrons were being asked to leave. As they exited, another argument broke out, which escalated into a fight. Tove texted her boyfriend, saying, "Johanna hit me." Despite this, the friends decided to resolve their issues through conversation instead of escalating the conflict. Tove had arrived at the party on her bicycle, but planned to walk home. The walk would take about 30 minutes. Tove chose to walk with her friends, who wanted to calmly discuss and settle their disagreements once and for all. A moment later, the three of them arrived at Johanna's house. Initially, they planned to leave without entering, but they later decided to go inside for a cup of coffee to make amends. At 1:48 a.m., Tove called her boyfriend and told him that after the party, she went to her friend's place and that everything was fine. He didn't detect anything unusual in her calm tone, but he became concerned when he found out Tove was at Johanna's apartment. He worried that the girls might start arguing again. Tove reassured him that everything was okay and that she would be home soon the next morning. Tov's mother tried to contact her daughter, but there was no response. They had planned to go shopping together that day by 10 a.m. Tove still hadn't replied, concerned. Her family decided to check her house. They found the door locked and received no answer. About 9 hours after Tove last communicated with her boyfriend, Tove's mother contacted the police. Initially, the police didn't take Tove's mother's concerns seriously, thinking it was normal for young people to be out late after a night at a bar. However, Tove's mother was persistent and eventually convinced the officers to take action. They interviewed Tove's mothers to understand the recent dynamics between Tove and her friends. When they learned about a conflict between Tove and one of her friends, they began to suspect that it might be connected to her disappearance. Tove's mobile phone was examined, revealing that it last connected around 4 a.m. on October 16. The signal was detected several kilometers away from her home, and the phone was turned off near marshy land. This area was chosen as the starting point for the search for Tove or any clues about her whereabouts. At the time Tove's phone last connected, Johanna and Maya were at Johanna's house. Detectives interviewed the girls in detail about their evening together and inquired about any conflicts among them. As they were the last people to see Tove alive, both girls were considered suspects, but were released because there was no evidence to charge them. They denied any involvement in Tove's disappearance, explaining that, after an argument, they reconciled and spent a calm evening with Tove at Johanna's house before they parted ways. They had not seen Tove since then. Detectives went to Tove's home to conduct searches, but found nothing suspicious. It seemed that Tove had not returned that night after meeting with her friends. It was then decided to go to Johanna's apartment, which was under renovation, so all the rooms were quite dusty but sterile clean. Moreover, there was a strong smell of cleaning products. On the bed, the police discovered a new sheet that did not match the color of the other bedding. It seemed that the sheet stood out against the rest of the set, as if it had been replaced quite recently. Johanna could not fully explain what had happened with the sheet and even refused to show it to the officers. In the kitchen, a large roll of black garbage bags was found, as well as a large container of bleach and a bottle of medical alcohol. Despite all this, no signs of a struggle or bloodstains were seen in the apartment. After the searches, it was decided to talk to Johanna and Maya once again, and they were officially interrogated. Both agreed to cooperate with the police and calmly answered the investigators' questions. Johanna seemed particularly calm. The girl's behavior appeared somewhat strange in light of the fact that it concerned the disappearance of their close friend. Johanna admitted that they had a fight the night before Tove's disappearance while at the bar. Moreover, Johanna recounted how a conflict arose between the girls, and she also mentioned that Tove had physically attacked her. Maya also described the argument that occurred between the friends. However, according to her, it seemed much less aggressive and brutal than how Johanna described it. This became the first clear contradiction that detectives discovered. Investigators checked the girls' mobile phones, and thanks to geolocation data, it was confirmed that they had all been at Johanna's house for a long time before Tove's disappearance. All of this sounded suspicious, as it seemed that they were either covering for each other or were accomplices in a crime during this period. Search teams continued to survey the area, and special dog units were brought in. Initially, the police conducted searches within a radius of 1.5 kilometers around the point where the last signal from Tove's phone was recorded. However, it quickly became clear that finding her there would not be possible, as there were no traces indicating the missing person. The search area was then expanded to the surroundings of the city. The day after re-interviewing Tove's friends, the police also publicly announced her disappearance, which sparked a wide public response. All local newspapers began publishing headlines about the search operation, along with photographs of hundreds of volunteers who took to the streets. By October 20, Johanna and Maya were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Both girls continued to insist on their innocence. However, By that time, the police had witnesses who would later help unravel the mystery of Tove's disappearance. One of the key figures in this case was Johanna's neighbor, whose real name was not disclosed to the public for safety reasons. According to this young man, he heard suspicious thuds coming from his neighbor's apartment around 3 a.m. At first, he did not pay attention to them, but the dull thuds continued for over an hour. He lived directly below her and decided to go out into the stairwell to listen more closely. He then decided to call his neighbor to make sure she was okay. He rang the doorbell twice, but no one answered. Instead, he heard silence as he was leaving. There were even more knocks, which became more frequent and faster, according to the neighbor. There followed about 10 to 15 dull thuds in a row before it went completely quiet. He estimated that everything was happening around the bathroom area of the apartment. He had already descended the stairs to his floor. As soon as he opened his door, he heard a door slam shut upstairs, Johanna's door. He looked outside and saw Johanna walking down the stairs. She smiled and apologized for the noise, explaining that she had a friend over and they had been drinking. She admitted that she and her friend had drunk too much, which was the reason they had been feeling sick in the bathroom, despite her neighbor's confusion. Johanna reassured him that there would be no more noise because her friend was now feeling better and had fallen asleep on the couch. Johanna then mentioned that she was planning to grab a late-night snack at McDonald's, where she would buy a cheeseburger. The neighbor kindly offered to drive her there, and Johanna accepted his offer when they stepped outside around 3 a.m. The neighbor noticed a bicycle in the middle of the driveway. He moved it and propped it against the fence to clear the way. Johanna explained that her friend had left it there and had probably forgotten to park it properly. The neighbor inquired about Johanna's friend several times because he found the unusual noise concerning. It didn't sound like vomiting and had lasted too long. He worried that her friend might need medical help, but Johanna assured him that everything was okay. She quickly changed the subject, seemingly trying to avoid talking about her friend, whom she claimed was resting at home. They ate cheeseburgers, and Johanna took one for her friend the following day. The bicycle that had been parked by the driveway was gone. Johanna mentioned that her friend was feeling better in the morning and had supposedly gone home with her when the neighbor spoke to the police. He remarked on how odd Johanna's behavior seemed, especially in light of the troubling news about Tove's disappearance. As the detectives examined Johanna's phone data during the investigation, they discovered that her trip to McDonald's was not the only one that night. Interestingly, they found that Tove's phone had movements that matched Johanna's exactly. When asked about this, Johanna couldn't explain why Tove's phone was moving, since Tove was not with them. However, the device actually moved and was later recorded at a nearby gas station before heading into a forest. Even more suspicious, Johanna returned to this location the following day. This is also where Tove's phone was last found. Search teams quickly intensified their efforts. On November 2, searchers scoured the wooded area near the city and discovered something unusual about 8 meters from the embankment. Hidden under the forest undergrowth, the ground was disturbed, with charred fragments and several plastic bags scattered about. Analysis later showed that these bags were identical to those found in Johanna's home. Under a thin layer of soil, severely burned human remains were uncovered. Identifiable only through forensic dental examinations, autopsy results revealed that the victim was Tove Tannis. The body was wrapped in a sheet that did not match any found in Johanna's home. Forensic experts collected important evidence from the crime scene, many of which were also discovered in Johanna's apartment. The police found that. The next day, immediately after the murder, Johanna visited several hardware stores in the city. Surveillance footage showed that she bought a new sheet, gasoline, and 3 bottles of surgical alcohol. These same items were recovered from the fire site in the forest to further investigate Johanna's involvement. The police examined her internet search history. In January, she had been looking up information about how to dispose of a body, the punishments for murder in Sweden, and the behaviors expected in women's prisons. It appeared that she had been planning the murder for nearly a year before it occurred. Johanna was charged with first-degree murder and attempting to destroy evidence. Based on the gathered information, she insisted that she had nothing to do with Tov's death. A memorial was held for Tove on the soccer field of her hometown, where she had played since childhood. Over 200 people attended to honor her memory by releasing glowing lanterns into the sky as new revelations emerged. Suspicions against Johanna grew, adding pressure on the young suspects involved. The entire nation of Sweden closely followed the investigation. Eventually, Maja came forward, expressing her willingness to cooperate with the authorities. Maja explained that shortly after she, Johanna, and Tove arrived at Johanna's apartment, another argument broke out. When things quieted down, Maja, extremely tired, lay down on her friend's bed and quickly fell asleep. In the night, she was suddenly awakened by Johanna. Maja was shocked to see Tove lying in the hallway. Johanna told Maja that Tove had fallen and hit her head in the bathroom, knocking her unconscious. They checked for a pulse but found none. Tove was dead. Frightened, they decided to dispose of her body. A few weeks later, Johanna chose to cooperate with the investigation. She explained that after everyone had calmed down, she wanted to ease the tension by showing Tove the new bathroom in her apartment, which was still under renovation. Johanna intended to showcase the only completed room at that time, however. When she invited Tove to look, Tove reacted sharply, saying there was nothing special to see. This led to Tove pushing Johanna, who then pushed back, causing Tove to fall to the floor. Johanna went over to Tove and asked how she was doing, but instead of answering, Tove grabbed Johanna by the throat and started to choke her. In response, Johanna also grabbed Tove's neck. Trying to defend herself, Maja witnessed the struggle and attempted to separate her friends. But by the time she managed to pull them apart, Tove had stopped breathing. They decided to dispose of the body. While they were occupied, a neighbor came over, so Johanna chose to go for a walk because she was hungry. When she returned, Maja got rid of the bicycle then. Johanna went to the store to buy the necessary supplies. They wrapped the body in a sheet and trash bags, then struggled to load it into Johanna's car. They took it to the forest, soaked it in gasoline, and attempted to set it on fire, hoping it would burn completely. However, the fire quickly extinguished, prompting Johanna to return to the hardware store for more gasoline. She then came back to reignite the body. Johanna and Maja accounts seemed unconvincing, especially Johanna's, and the detectives did not believe that Tove was the one who initiated the fight. At that point, everyone knew Johanna had always been the more aggressive one. When she saw Tove lifeless, it appeared Johanna was satisfied with what had happened. Maja herself doubted it was an accident and suspected that Johanna had killed Tove while she was asleep. The trial started on March 27, 2023, where the jury had to determine if Johanna Jansson and Maja Hellman were guilty of murder. Journalists closely followed the trial. The prosecution argued that both girls were untruthful, according to law enforcement. In a moment of rage, Johanna and Maja attacked Tove, with Maja restraining her while Johanna strangled her. Afterward, they transported Tove to the forest, doused her with a flammable liquid, and set her on fire to conceal their crime. The bathroom was thoroughly examined by forensic experts, who found DNA evidence from Johanna and Maja. The prosecution argued that Maja was less culpable and did not directly participate in the murder or strangle her friend. However, Maja did hold Tove down to prevent her from resisting and assisted in disposing of the body. Forensic tests confirmed that Tove died from strangulation. In court on March 29, 2023, Maja's lawyers claimed she had no part in the attack, insisting she was asleep during the incident. They argued that Maja helped destroy evidence and move the body to the forest out of fear, implying that Johanna may have intimidated her into compliance. In contrast, Johanna's lawyers sought to shift the blame to Maja, suggesting that Johanna alone could not have managed the situation. A key argument made by the defense was that Maja and Tove had just turned 18, while Johanna was older and more experienced. Additionally, Johanna was the more dominant figure in their friendship. However, despite the defense's strong arguments, April 19, the court ruled both girls guilty of first-degree murder. Johanna Jansson and Maja Hellman received life sentences, marking the first time such a sentence was imposed on girls under 21 in Sweden. The fairness of this verdict remains a topic of debate. Both said they would appeal. There are at least two conflicting accounts of what occurred in Johanna's apartment, suggesting that at least one girl is telling the truth, if both are lying. The only person who could clarify the events is already deceased. The lawyers sought to appeal the verdict, and the investigation continued. Revealing new information, it was discovered that a year before the murder, Johanna had expressed hatred towards Tove by writing hateful poems about Tove and her twin sister in January 2022. Johanna attempted to kill Tove by stuffing cardboard through the door and setting fire to the house where Tove and her family lived. Fortunately, the fire was contained, but it caused significant damage to the facade and door. Johanna also told friends she wanted Tove dead, indicating she had both a motive and a strong desire to harm her friend. A few months later, the situation changed. The appellate court acquitted Maja, deciding that the evidence against her for murder was insufficient. However, she was found guilty of obstructing justice for helping to dispose of the body and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Most people believe that Johanna acted alone in the incident with her friend, while Maja simply assisted in getting rid of the body. Meanwhile, Johanna still insists that her account of events is true. On appeal to the Court of Appeal, October 2023, Johanna Jansson was sentenced to 16 years in prison. She will remain incarcerated until she turns 18 and is required to pay 1 million Swedish kroner to Tove's family. Tove's family have appealed the sentence to the Supreme Court in the hope that Johanna Jansson's sentence will be increased, knowing that her chances of winning her appeal were slim. Johanna attempted to escape from prison with another inmate on New Year's Eve 2024. Their escape plan was uncovered. They intended to take a prison staff member hostage to help them flee. Fortunately, prison authorities discovered the scheme before it could be carried out. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of April Jones. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007. April is a cheerful child, but she also has her own problems. Born 7 weeks early, she had some early health issues, but with medical support, she grew into a typical young girl. However, April was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, a condition caused by a brain injury, often due to a lack of oxygen at or shortly after birth. Cerebral palsy affected her lower body. Although her condition was not very severe, it caused her pain and made basic muscle movements difficult. Despite having a mild condition, she required special care. On October 1, 2012, at around 7 o'clock in the evening, 5 years old, April was playing outside with her friend at the Bryn Aeg housing estate in West Wales. Usually, April's parents don't let her go out to play when it's dark like that, but because she had received an excellent report card the day before, they allowed her extra playtime. April was supposed to return home after playing outside with her friend for about 20 minutes, but after that she did not return home. Her parents had last seen her on a bike, so they went out to look for her. They found April's 7-year-old friend nearby, but April wasn't with her. The friend explained that April had gotten into a car. Fortunately, she could describe the man who took April. He was wearing a green jacket, had blue or green eyes, brown hair, and a beard. Despite being young, the friend provided a crucial detail. She saw April get into the car on the driver's side. In the UK, the steering wheel is on the right side, which suggests the man was driving a left-hand drive car. Despite it being nighttime, but the police responded swiftly. The first officers reached the scene, the 999 call. While search teams were being assembled, authorities interviewed people who knew April to determine if anything unusual had occurred that day or in the days before her disappearance. April's family couldn't think of anything that could help the police. April had gone to her swimming class earlier that day, and after returning home, she was allowed to play outside with her friends. It had only been a short while since April went out, but it was getting late in the autumn, so it would get dark soon, making it very difficult to find her. News of April's disappearance spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, through word of mouth and social networks. Within hours, locals left their homes to help search her. Although their intentions were good, this outpouring of support hindered the police investigation. The police were grateful for everyone's enthusiasm, but they still needed to conduct door-to-door inquiries to see if anyone had seen April or seen the person who might have taken her. The problem was that very few people were at home because most had gone out to assist with the search. The story of April's disappearance quickly drew national attention. Television crews and reporters from all over the country flocked to the small town to cover the incident. At 10:30, the police provided a status update to the public and media, voicing concern as they still hadn't found any leads related to April. They appealed to anyone with information to come forward right away. On the evening of October 1st, authorities released more details about April's disappearance. At the time she went missing, April was wearing her school polo shirt and a purple coat. Over 100 people had joined the search to support the police. The local community played a crucial role in the search, as their knowledge of the area invaluable. In addition to locals, a large number of volunteers from England traveled to Wales to assist, and several people from South Wales also joined the search. The search was difficult due to the town's surroundings, which included mountains, waterfalls, gorges, dense forests, and uneven terrain, all of which were exacerbated by the cold, rainy, and overcast autumn evening. The police divided the volunteers into multiple search teams, which then combed through a vast area of about 60 square kilometers. After 8 hours of searching the difficult Welsh terrain, by 3:30 a.m., the volunteers had thoroughly covered the area. Although the situation was desperate, there was a poignant beauty in the fact that many people were willing to give their time to help find little April. This outpouring of support must have brought some comfort to her family, who waited anxiously by the phone for news. However, the police had prohibited the family from joining the search, fear that they might encounter terrible things about their daughter. On October 2, 2012, April was still missing despite extensive nighttime searches. In response, the police in Wales issued a child rescue notice, a nationwide alert that disseminated April's description and that of her abductor to all UK police agencies. This was the first time the child rescue alarm had been sounded nationwide. 14 hours after April's disappearance, the media began pressuring the police to release every detail of their investigation. The police faced criticism for their handling of the case. But it can be argued that this was unfair. They had responded swiftly, organizing search parties and searching for April throughout the night, doing everything possible given the challenging weather. Detective Superintendent Andy John led the investigation, keeping the public and media informed with regular updates. To aid the search, he established roadblocks where officers stopped and inspected every vehicle. Posters with April's photo were also distributed, aiming to spark anyone's memory that might help locate her. People living nearby and those from farther away had been sending reports to the police. Many of these reports mentioned the same name, Mark Bridger. Several locals identified Mark as matching describe April's kidnapper. He was known as a Land Rover driver with blue eyes and short facial hair, and notably, his car had a left-hand drive. Witnesses reported seeing Mark or his car near where April went missing. They found the last known address of Mark and multiple attempts to contact him. However, both Mark and April were not present at the address. Mark has never encountered any legal problems before. However, some local residents reported that he had participated in the initial nighttime search for April. Due to the large number of volunteers, it was not possible to verify this information. The authorities shifted their focus to locating Mark. They deployed helicopters to scour the area from above while officers searched all locations on the ground. They discovered that Mark had recently moved into a cottage called Mount Pleasant. When police arrived, they found no one living there and there were no cars there. They entered the cottage and called out April's name, but there was no response. It was initially unclear whether Mark had been evading authorities. At 4:30, police announced that Mark had been captured. Before, a police aircraft spotted him walking his dog on a country road near April's family home. He appeared to have altered his appearance by shaving his head and beard. Police helicopters led patrol cars to Mark's location. When stopped by officers, he provided his name without attempting to hide his identity. The officer then inquired about April's whereabouts, to which he responded that it was an accident, claiming he had unintentionally crushed her with his car and was now unaware of her location. During the arrest, Mark became visibly emotional. The arresting officers informed him of his rights, stating, "You do not have to say anything, but anything you say may be used as evidence." Strangely enough, Mark was eager to talk, even though he didn't have to. The officers reminded him that he was free to speak or not. Mark told them he had been searching for April on foot day and night. His car, a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery, was in the garage. He denied abducting her and said he tried to revive her but panicked. He only learned her name that morning from the news. He wished he could remember where he left her, saying she was lifeless on the seat. He apologized to April's family. Meanwhile, in April's hometown, a large-scale search operation was underway. Police, canine teams, volunteers, and mountain rescuers scoured the Welsh countryside, but couldn't find her. Volunteers numbering in the hundreds from all over the country worked relentlessly, usually only sleep for a few hours, then continue searching. The police received over 600 offers of help, with many suggesting areas to search. Thanks to local expertise, over 20 areas were thoroughly checked. At this stage, detectives had Mark Bridger in custody and were interrogating him. Mark immediately began discussing the incidents of that day. He stated that he had no knowledge of April's whereabouts and described his activities, which included attending a parent-teacher conference at his daughter's school and then parking near his girlfriend's house, also which is close to April's parents' house. Mark admitted to consuming a few drinks and seeing two girls riding their bicycles. He remembered the dark-haired girl riding behind his car, and claimed that when he looked for the other girl, she was nowhere to be seen, but then suddenly her bike appeared. Mark admitted that he had been nearby at the time of the incident and April was hit by his car while she was riding her bike. He claimed he was drunk at the time. He stated that he didn't intend to harm April, but knew he had made a mistake. He said he took her into his car to rush her to the hospital. Mark described April's condition, said her face had turned pale, and her lips were purple. He acknowledged that his actions led to her death and mentioned that he knew her parents. However, after this admission, Mark's memory became unclear. Despite initially being open about his involvement, but he couldn't recall what he did with April's body after she died. Even though the police tried to interrogate Mark many times, but they were hindered when he suddenly claimed to have amnesia. He repeatedly stated that he was in his house, couldn't find April, and wouldn't have abandoned her. Initially, Mark was cooperative and honest with the police, but they began to doubt his sincerity when he claimed memory loss at the exact moment April went missing and suspected that he might be withholding information. The police decided to tread carefully, they aware that using an aggressive tone during questioning might lead Mark to refuse further cooperation. The police obtained a statement from April's 7-year-old friend, claiming that April voluntarily got into Mark's car, appeared happy, and was smiling. It is unlikely that someone would deceive a child in this way without reason or motive. However, the police also had a witness who contradicted this account. The witness reported that April entered the Land Rover through the driver's door, which is actually the left-hand side door in the UK. This contradicts Mark's story, suggesting that his testimony may be fabricated. When confronted with this new information, Mark became uncomfortable. Despite this, he maintained his original story and showed no signs of wavering under various lines of questioning. Detectives employed a novel approach by consulting Dr. Joe Sullivan, a renowned expert in criminal body language and behavior. Dr. Sullivan's involvement went beyond analyzing Mark's interviews. He also visited his home to gather information for a psychological profile. What he found was astounding. Mark's home contained an assortment of disturbing items, including knives, handcuffs, and a shotgun, some of which were concealed, while others were openly displayed. Furthermore, he worked at a slaughterhouse. According to Dr. Sullivan's assessment, Mark was a fantasist who identified himself with fictional characters like Rambo, indicating a disconnection from reality. Despite Dr. Sullivan's advice, the police took a paternalistic approach with Mark. However, he stuck to his story. The police then relied on forensic specialists to thoroughly search his house for evidence. The search team found small specks of blood in the restroom, but at that point, it was unclear whose blood it was. It was possible that the blood came from he cutting himself while shaving. The police sent the samples to the laboratory, but it would take up to 24 hours to get the results. Dr. Sullivan warned the police that Mark was unlikely to feel empathy or guilt about his actions. Although he might try to pretend otherwise, but Dr. Sullivan believed that he lacked these emotions. As a result, Dr. Sullivan advised the police that appealing to his better nature would be pointless, as he didn't have one. The police cannot expect Mark to be remorseful, sympathetic, or confess his guilt. The police took Dr. Sullivan's advice seriously and redetained Mark on suspicion of murder. This sudden turn caught Bridger off guard, and him pale. Furthermore, explicit child photos were discovered on his laptop, leading to his second arrest for possessing offensive images of children. As the investigation intensified, Mark suspected the police had more information than they were letting on. Meanwhile, April's parents were informed on Thursday, 3 days after her disappearance, that the police had shifted their focus from finding her alive to investigating a murder case. They had to break the devastating news to their children that they had lost a sister. Receiving news that their daughter was presumed dead, but her body hasn't been found yet, was a difficult pill to swallow. The police kept this information from Mark, but they also advised the volunteers who had been tirelessly searching for April to stand down and let the experts handle the situation. However, this suggestion was met with resistance from the hundreds of volunteers, many of whom were in tears as they left the site. On Friday, 4 days after April vanished, police search teams continued their search for clues. There was no evidence that Mark killed April, according to forensic experts. A thorough examination of his Land Rover revealed no marks, no blood, no hair, and no skin. This was despite Mark's claim that there should have been signs of April's injuries, such as scratches on the bumper or blood or hair inside the car. He tried to explain by saying he didn't see any blood on April after his car hit her. Although April was run over, she didn't appear to have any open wounds. However, Mark's story was about to be exposed as a fabrication. On Friday night at 6:15 p.m., the lab contacted the detectives. The results of the DNA comparison between April's toothbrush and the blood spatters found in Mark's restroom. They matched. Additionally, DNA evidence was found on his fleece collar and jogging bottoms. After gathering enough evidence, the police charged April. They found photos on his laptop, which they showed him during questioning. The photos depicted minors being sexualized, exploited, and manipulated. However, Mark denied any wrongdoing, claiming he didn't enjoy things, despite being shown the images and asked to describe them. The photos were disturbing and something no reasonable person would have. Mark also denied searching for explicit websites for personal gratification, even when confronted with his internet search history. After 3.5 days in custody, the police's 96-hour questioning period was almost over. They made one last attempt to get Mark to tell the truth. The decision to press charges now rested with the Crown Prosecution Service. The police questioned Mark about April's whereabouts and whether he intended to murder her. They pointed out that no blood was found on the bathroom walls at his house, yet a full DNA profile of April was discovered. Mark claimed that if he had blood on his hands and didn't dry them, he might have accidentally flicked blood onto the walls. However, this contradicted his previous statement that he hadn't experienced any issues with blood for a week prior. Despite the inconsistencies, Mark stuck to his story, stating that some blood must have been present, even though he had previously claimed there was no blood on him or April, or in the car. Mark was subjected to intense police questioning regarding the images found on his laptop. The police were struggling to find ways to get him to reveal the truth. When asked if he was using the photographs for self-gratification, he denied it. However, he did suggest that a buildup of sexual frustration might have contributed to his actions on the morning in question. Mark's composure eventually began to crack under the pressure of questioning. He became agitated, raised his voice, and started using profanity. It was clear that he took issue with being labeled a pedophile. After a lengthy and challenging process, the police were finally able to uncover Mark's true nature. They were convinced they had the right person and had already submitted the case to the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS. The CPS subsequently authorized the police to charge Mark with the abduction and murder of April Jones. When informed of the charges, Mark showed no emotion or remorse. As he arrived at court in a prison van, everyone threw objects and shouted obscenities at him. Over the next 2 weeks, forensic investigators found more and more blood traces from April at Mark's house. The fireplace also contained several broken bones, but they were so badly decomposed that it was impossible to confirm if they belonged to April. On May 30, 2013, a jury convicted 47-year-old Mark Bridger of kidnapping and murdering April Jones. Judge Mr. Justice Griffith Williams described Mark as a chronic liar and a pedophile who had long harbored fantasies about young girls. However, the judge believed that he was not specifically targeting April, but rather was pursuing a young girl in general. Unfortunately, April became the poor victim of Mark's actions. Mr. Justice Griffith Williams immediately sentenced Mark Bridger to life in prison, with the details of his sentence to remain undisclosed to the public. Mark claimed that April's death was a tragic accident, resulting from his car hitting her. However, his credibility had been lost long before his trial, in the eyes of both law enforcement and the judicial system. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, Mark was unable to escape justice. April was a young girl who was playing outside with her friend, then she was targeted by an individual with a twisted mind. April's family was relieved that Mark would spend the rest of his life in prison, unable to harm any more children, despite their overwhelming grief. However, April's remains were never found after the trial. While 17 bone fragments were discovered in Mark's house, but it was impossible to point out that they belonged to April. April's passing has left an unfillable void in the hearts of her loved ones. It is hoped that her family and friends can find some way to rebuild their lives. A funeral service for April was held in her hometown on April 26, 2013. May April Jones rest in peace. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fern Vivano was born on May 29, 1996, in La Granja, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital. She was the youngest of 3 children in a modest family, with her parents Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. She grew up with her older brother Michelangelo and sister Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother stayed at home to care for the children and create a warm family atmosphere. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock for her. Even though they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father is still very interested in his children's lives, including providing financial support, Valeria felt resentment towards him. They sometimes argued and went months without speaking, but they always managed to reconcile. Soon after the divorce, Miguel remarried, and Valeria gained two half-siblings. She maintained warm family relationships with them, as well as with her siblings, Daniela and Michelangelo. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried. She focused on raising her children and later took care of her grandchildren. From a young age, Valeria showed a strong character, determination, and remarkable perseverance in everything she did. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and was always brave and fair, willing to help others, even when it put her at risk. She pursued a career in law enforcement because of her desire to help people in need and fight for justice. After finishing high school, Valeria enrolled in a police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016, becoming an investigator. At just 20 years old, she joined the Chilean police force. The following year, she started working in the bureau that investigates serious crimes in the capital. From the very beginning, Valeria demonstrated her commitment as a law enforcement officer and her passion for justice. She loved her job, carried out her responsibilities with care, and was always ready to respond to emergencies, even in the middle of the night. She would rush to crime scenes, pursue criminals, and sometimes had to provide emotional support to people who had lost loved ones. Her colleagues described Valeria as kind, cheerful, and friendly, while also recognizing her as a true professional and a dependable partner. Valeria served in the police force for nearly 5.5 years, during which she received numerous awards and recognition. She advanced in her career, gaining the respect of her colleagues and the admiration of her superiors. She also represented her department in Spain, spending about 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit. She took great pride in being entrusted with such significant responsibilities. By 2020, she had been promoted to assistant inspector. In January 2020, Valeria welcomed a new member to her precinct, 21 years old Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, who had just graduated from the police academy. Valeria took on the role of his mentor as he started his first job. A few months later, they became partners and initially got along well. Lionel comes from a wealthy and powerful family, with an uncle who is a high-ranking official. Having grown up in comfort and always getting what he wanted, because of this, he became quite selfish and believed that everything should go his way. Valeria noticed her new colleague, Lionel, who repeatedly tried to get her attention and asked her out several times. Each time, she firmly rejected him. Valeria was serious about her job and believed that workplace romances were inappropriate. She viewed Lionel as immature, not because he was 3 years younger, but due to his childish behavior. Despite this, she hoped to help him grow up. In July 2020, Valeria and Lionel attempted to catch robbers who had stolen money from a store's cash register. The criminals remained at the scene and opened fire, leading to a shootout in which Lionel fatally shot both of them. While this situation could have been avoided, Lionel's response was considered appropriate for apprehending the suspects. Nonetheless, this incident put a strain on the relationship between Valeria and Lionel. Valeria's last birthday celebration was on May 29, 2021, when she turned 25. The event took place at her mother's house and was attended by many guests, including family, friends, and co-workers. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria decided not to invite his, as he had recently tried to pursue her again, and she wanted to avoid any awkwardness. When Valeria attempted to discuss with him, he only reiterated his feelings for her, which she preferred to keep private from her colleagues. Despite the big turnout, presents, warm wishes, and heartfelt congratulations, Valeria appeared upset, even as she tried to smile. She had recently argued with her father and they hadn't spoken in days. Valeria had hoped her father would come to her birthday, but instead, he only sent a brief congratulatory message and didn't even call. Jacqueline, her mother, recognized her daughter's unhappiness and understood the cause of her sorrow. Frustrated with her ex-husband's behavior, she believed he would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would resolve their differences, as they had in the past. Tragically, Valeria and her father never had the opportunity to speak again. Just 2 weeks later, on June 13, 2021, Valeria lost her life while on duty. She was working the night shift, patrolling the streets and checking vehicles as part of a manhunt for a suspect in connection with a crime against a young woman that occurred yesterday on the outskirts of the capital. Authorities were on high alert for a white Kia, suspected to be driven by one of the criminals. The suspect likely had a weapon and may not have been alone in the vehicle. Valeria was in a patrol car with her partner, Lionel, and they were being driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and decided to chase it without waiting for backup. The officers successfully blocked the suspect's escape. Lionel and Vivano got out of their car with their guns drawn, ordering the suspects to surrender and exit their vehicle with their hands raised. Suddenly, a single gunshot was heard, leaving everyone confused about who had fired and from where. Valeria, holding her side, collapsed onto the asphalt next to the police car. Reinforcements arrived at that moment, and Valeria's colleagues heard the gunshot and saw she was injured, but they didn't fully understand what had happened or who had shot her. Taking advantage of the chaos, the criminals quickly fled the scene while first aid was being given to the wounded officer. Despite the swift arrival of medics and the efforts of her colleagues to control the bleeding, Valeria could not be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists worked hard to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital parts, she passed away on the operating table without regaining consciousness. When Valeria's family received the news, her parents, brothers, and sisters quickly went to the hospital. Unfortunately, by the time they arrived, had already passed away. Miguel was not only heartbroken but completely shattered, as he never had the chance to talk to and make amends with his dear daughter after their last small argument. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and was so distressed by the tragedy that he needed medical help to avoid a heart attack. Valeria was officially reported to have died while on duty during an operation aimed at capturing dangerous criminals. She was celebrated as a hero who sacrificed her life for the safety and well-being of others. Local media extensively covered the incident, with reporters highlighting her bravery and selflessness. The investigation into her death was conducted by experts from the Homicide and Major Crimes Division, where Valeria had previously served. They determined that she died from a gunshot wound to the abdomen, inflicted by an assailant in the direction of the suspect's vehicle that she and her colleagues were chasing. The situation initially seemed straightforward, as witnesses supported the narrative, making it appear that the case had been resolved. The only task left was to locate and hold the offenders accountable, who were still at large and possibly fleeing. Shortly after, the suspects were caught, attracting significant public attention. The criminals were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Capon and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was kept confidential due to his age. Both individuals had prior convictions for lesser crimes. The then president of Chile, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement assuring the public that the perpetrators would face justice according to the law. However, omething felt off. After the autopsy and necessary examinations, Valeria's body was returned to her family, who gave her a respectful burial in one of the city's cemeteries. Hundreds attended the funeral to pay their respects and offer condolences to her family. Jacqueline and Miguel described the entire experience as a nightmare. Among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed to grieve more than anyone else. However, other colleagues noted there had recently been some tension between them, to the point that Valeria hadn't invited Lionel to her birthday party. Shortly after the funeral, court proceedings began for the suspects who had been arrested the day after the incident and were currently in custody. Everyone believes that the person responsible for Valeria's death has been caught, and proving their guilt seems simple, especially when they begin to give confessions. However, it soon became apparent that the investigation had serious flaws from the beginning. Important details were missed, and crucial forensic evidence was minimized. The process was mismanaged, and higher officials tried to hide the identity of the actual person responsible for Valeria's death. About a month and a half after Valeria's death, the case took an unexpected turn. By the end of July, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged involvement in the incident that led to Valeria's death. On August 1st, the parents of Valeria were summoned to the prosecutor's office in the capital for an important meeting. They believed this meant that new evidence had come to light, and that the detainees would finally face the punishment they deserved. Miguel and Jacqueline were devastated to hear that Valeria was killed by a bullet fired by a colleague. Prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco personally announced the news, expressing condolences and apologizing on behalf of the entire investigation team. Valeria's parents were in shock. They couldn't grasp how it could have occurred. The fatal shot that killed Valeria was fired from a gun by one of her colleagues. A ballistics examination conducted that day confirmed this, but the results were inaccurately reported. The bullet taken from the body Valeria was incorrectly categorized with different characteristics, such as shape, caliber, and weight. Additionally, the bullet had passed through the body rather than being extracted from it. There was a mix-up in the forensic reports regarding the entry and exit wounds. The bullet did not enter through the abdomen and exit through the back as stated. In fact, the shot was fired at her back. Several pages from the autopsy report were missing, and others had been obviously tampered with. Furthermore, the detainees involved in the trial, who supposedly admitted their guilt and were about to be sentenced, began to file complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and intimidation, and that the firearm they had that night was not loaded. Valeria's story takes a sudden turn when she goes from a tragic hero who died on the job to a victim of betrayal, murdered by her own colleagues. In light of these new developments, the main suspects became Felipe Gilardo Era, the officer driving the police car, and Valeria's partner, Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, who was in the back seat. Both were promptly suspended from their duties. On August 5th, it was revealed that the bullet that killed Valeria came from a service weapon. Later, an examination report showed that only Lionel had gunshot residue on his hands, making him the prime suspect. Interestingly, this information had not been disclosed earlier, as if it had been overlooked entirely. Several reports related to the ballistics examination and the pathologist's findings were mistakenly placed in an archive box, which was not properly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was due to an accident, criminal negligence, or an intentional effort to hide important information. Now, the police officers involved in to capture the criminals that night are themselves regarded as suspects in the murder of Valeria. They, along with the previously arrested suspects, participated in a reenactment of the incident from that night. Felipe stated that from the driver's seat, he could only see Valeria, who was next to him in the front passenger seat and was the first to get out of the car. Lionel was sitting in the back and also exited, but the driver couldn't see his actions. Valeria had taken only a few steps when a shot rang out, she fell, and the suspect's car they were pursuing sped away. Lionel quickly ran to help Valeria. Lionel mentioned that he and Felipe exited the patrol car almost at the same time, but she had rushed forward as soon as the shot was fired. He firmly maintained that he did not shoot Valeria, and Philippe must witness and confirm this. He also confirmed that he was the first to reach Valeria and attempted to apply pressure to her wound. The testimonies from the witnesses varied, but the investigation revealed that Lionel was positioned behind Valeria at the time of the gunshot, and the bullet's path confirmed his location. Additionally, he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands. New information from previously undisclosed reports and exam results led to potential motives for the crime. Lionel was arrested as the main suspect, while the previously detained young men were released with a non-exit agreement, since there were no charges against them. However, the reason for Lionel's actions is still uncertain. The primary theory was that the incident was a tragic accident. It is believed that Lionel, inexperienced officer, accidentally discharged his weapon while standing behind Valeria. In a state of panic, he tried to assist her, and when he returned his service weapon that day, he claimed he hadn't fired it. However, the truth soon emerged, and the young man's powerful relatives used their wealth and connections to try to cover up the incident. Because of that, the cleaned reports, missing documents, confusing evidence, and coerced testimonies from the detained individuals contributed. One theory, which Lionel himself partially confirmed, was that he was in love with Valeria and desperately wanted her attention. Unfortunately, his attempts only annoyed her, and she didn't even invite him to her birthday party, which the whole department attended. The shot in the back was his way of seeking revenge for this rejection. Another theory, suggested by Valeria's relatives, was that Valeria had uncovered something she shouldn't have, perhaps a corruption scheme or official misconduct. Being an honest and fair person, she would expose the culprit, leading to her being murdered to cover up the evidence. Young Lionel was chosen to carry out this act, with the promise that he would remain above suspicion. After Philippe was taken into custody, suspicions regarding Philippe remained. He was armed with the same type of service weapon, stood behind Valeria, and had the opportunity to fire the shot. Additionally, Philippe had a history of discipline for the unjustified use of a weapon during a criminal arrest, although no one was hurt in that incident. Because of this, he earned the nickname, the Reckless Shooter. Lionel's defense team quickly adopted this theory, claiming that Philippe accidentally shot Valeria. Since both Philippe and Lionel carried identical service weapons, it was possible that the guns were mixed up or intentionally swapped. Additionally, Philippe was inconsistent in his testimony, changing it multiple times. He later said he couldn't accurately recall the incident of that night because everything happened so quickly. However, no gunpowder residue was found on his hands, suggesting he was innocent. In response, Lionel claimed that gunpowder got on his hands while he was applying pressure to Valeria's wound, and that Era, who also assisted she, might have washed his hands before the examination. This explanation was not credible, as Valeria's blood stains were still on Philippe's hands, and it is impossible to wash away gunpowder without also removing blood. The trial and verdict have raised concerns about the competence of the investigation team, leaving Valeria's parents feeling desperate in their quest for justice. The new developments in the case led to public outrage and diminished trust in law enforcement. This story garnered attention not just from Chilean media but also from international outlets. As a result, several high-ranking officials were suspended or lost their jobs, including the head of the Homicide Investigation Department. Following a further investigation, Lionel was identified as the sole suspect, with all others cleared and designated as witnesses. In the spring of 2022, he was officially charged and remained in custody until the trial concluded. The hearings for the case began in March of the following year, and based on the evidence and witness testimonies, Lionel's guilt was clearly established. At first, the prosecution charged Lionel with intentionally murdering Valeria and aimed for the harshest possible sentence. But Lionel maintained that he would never hurt Valeria because he loved her. However, the bullet that killed her came from his gun. Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales was convicted of manslaughter and received a 12-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. After the verdict was announced, the Vivano family voiced their disappointment, believing the sentence was too light. Meanwhile, Lionel and his legal team quickly filed several appeals. In February 2024, Valeria's family received a shocking update when the Supreme Court unexpectedly reduced the punishment for Lionel to just 540 days in prison, starting from the day he was arrested. This meant he effectively walked out of the courtroom a free man. In response, Valeria Vivano's family intends to sue the Chilean government, alleging that the judges acted corruptly. In a statement, Valeria's mother expressed her heartbreak, stating that the original 12-year sentence had felt too lenient, but the new decision felt like a mockery. She mentioned that it was as if she had lost her daughter all over again and that she no longer had faith in justice. Furthermore, she emphasized that their family was determined to hold the negligent Chilean government for what had happened. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jock Waller. June 1, 2011 marked a turning point in the life of the Jock Waller family. That day, Jock called her sister Cheryl to say that she was going to pick up her children from her ex-husband Clay Waller and would be home later. However, Jock never returned and did not call back. After trying to contact her sister without success, Cheryl became increasingly worried. To address her concerns, she drove to the police station around 7 p.m. At the station, Cheryl announced that Clay Waller had killed younger sister. It was a shocking statement for all the police, as Jock had only called Cheryl a few hours earlier and there was no reason to be alarmed and assume that she was in trouble. But it turned out that Cheryl's hunch was correct, and her sister Jock was indeed caught up in a macabre story. So what happened to Jock, and what made Cheryl really believe that Clay Waller had killed her sister even before Jock was reported missing? Jock was a sweet, kind, and caring girl when she met Clay, and they hit it off. Clay had a stutter that caused some people to make fun of him, which made him feel self-conscious. Jock, however, was different. She never made fun of him and always protected him, making sure he didn't get hurt. That was her nature. She protected the vulnerable, fought against injustice, and helped people. As their love blossomed, Jock and Clay became closer and eventually married when they were in their 30s. They bought a small house in Sanguine View, Missouri, and Jock was building a family there. Jock had a successful career, unlike her husband, whose life was constantly failing and couldn't stay in one place for long. As a result, Jock was the sole provider for the family. She had always dreamed of having children, and when she found out she was pregnant, she was overjoyed. She was even more delighted to learn that she would be having triplets. The couple welcomed 2 daughters, Avery and Addison, and a son named Maddox. Caring for 3 newborns at once was a huge challenge for Jock, but she did not complain. Instead, she took on the responsibility alone, as her husband seemed indifferent to the children. Clay took a job at the sheriff's office to support the family while his wife took care of the children, but he did not stay long. He was fired after a year, and during that time, only Jock's parents and sister helped her with the children so she could rest. After Clay lost her job, Jock began working to support the family. Despite having a child, Clay did not change his habits and showed little interest in his family or his job. Occasionally, he took on a part-time job, but it did not bring in the income they needed. He seemed content to live off Jock, who worked 40 hours a week while still caring for the children. Jock's career took off, leading her to a management position at an insurance company. However, this success only made her husband more comfortable, and he decided not to worry about money anymore. Instead of appreciating his wife, Clay abused her in every way possible. He insulted her, called her worthless, and told her that no one wanted her. He had affairs with other women. Jacques' parents and sister were extremely outraged by her husband's behavior and convinced her to divorce him. However, at that time, Jacques was not ready for such an extreme choice and tried to keep her family together. Every day, any hope of saving her marriage went up in smoke before her eyes. A few years later, the couple began to have problems. They were in financial trouble because her husband was not working and Jacques' salary was not enough to support their growing family. The mortgage debts kept mounting and they were in danger of losing their home. Jacques decided to move in with her sister, while her husband stayed with a friend. By this time, the children were a little older and Jacques made the difficult but necessary decision for herself to get a divorce because she felt that she and the children deserved a better life. She talked to her husband about it and at first, Clay took the news calmly. However, he later changed his mind and refused to divorce. Clay began to threaten Jacques. At first, the threats were indirect and vague, but eventually, he directly threatened her life, claiming that divorcing him would be a death sentence for her and the children. This scared Jacques, but she did not give up on her decision. She could not continue living this way and sought to distance herself from her husband. Jacques confided in her family about Clay's behavior and kept a diary of his disturbing actions. She also noted that her husband had been following her. At the time, Jacques and the children were staying with her sister. The children, who were only 5 years old, did not understand the situation, but Jacques explained that it was necessary. Eventually, things began to return to normal and the divorce proceedings were almost complete. Clay seemed to have accepted the divorce and stopped bothering Jacques. The two began to move forward and began to build a new relationship. Jacques allowed her husband to visit the children and they stopped arguing. On June 1, 2011, Clay and Jacques scheduled a meeting at the lawyer's office to discuss the final important details of the divorce. That day, their son Maddox was with his father, while the other children were at Jacques' sister Cheryl's house. After the meeting, Jacques planned to pick up her son. When she left the office, she called her sister Cheryl and told her everything had gone well. She drove to Clay's house to pick up her son and then made plans to return to her sister's house. That was their last conversation. Jacques, 39, never heard from her again. Over time, Cheryl grew worried and started calling Jacques, but she didn't answer. Cheryl then tried calling Clay, but he didn't answer either. Cheryl suspected that Clay might have done something to Jacques, so she texted him, "If I don't hear from Jacques in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police." Clay immediately called her back, asking what was wrong. Cheryl replied that he knew exactly what she meant. But Clay insisted that he did not know where Jacques was and promised to tell her to call Cheryl back when he saw her. Doubting him, Cheryl took younger sister children to her parents' house and filed a police report herself. The police were wary of Cheryl's claim that Clay was involved in her sister's disappearance, but did not send her home to wait for 24 hours to pass. Instead, they quickly decided to contact Clay to find out if there was any clue as to Jacques' whereabouts. They called Clay, and he said that he had lunch with Jacques. He said that they had met at the lawyer's office to discuss some aspects of the divorce and then drove to his house to talk further. He said they had a chat and then he went to the store. When he returned, Jacques' car was gone and he assumed that she had left. According to Clay, their son Maddox was in Illinois with his new girlfriend at the time, and Jacques knew this and was not concerned about their son. He insisted that she had come to his house just to talk, not for their son. Clay's words seemed hard to believe. Jacques had made it clear to her sister that she had come to Clay's house for her son. She had no intention of discussing anything with him, especially since she would not allow her son to be with another woman so far away. She would have been furious with Clay in that situation. Cheryl did not believe the story. She convinced the police that Clay was lying and hiding something, and that things were indeed serious. Jacques and her car were reported missing, and a massive search began. Hours later, Jacques' car, a Honda Pilot, was found on the interstate with flat tires. It was no accident. The tires had been deliberately punctured and looked like they had been set up. The car was found open and empty, with some blood on the back seat, but there were no clues to Jacques' whereabouts. It seemed increasingly likely that she had been attacked and kidnapped. The search for Jacques focused on that area, with many volunteers working alongside police and rescue dogs. Despite the unbearable heat, people were eager to help. The family offered a $3,500 reward for any information about Jacques' whereabouts. Despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful. The police began to focus more on her ex-husband, Clay. They went to his house to talk to him again, but Clay repeated the same story. When police asked to search his home and car, Clay refused and immediately hired a lawyer to defend his rights. For days after she disappeared, Clay left his wife a tearful voicemail. "Hi honey, it's Sunday. I went missing on Wednesday. Please, if you get this message, call me. I don't know where you are and I miss you so much. Please call me." The police then obtained a search warrant and returned to his home. While examining the car, they discovered stains that looked like blood. The forensic team collected samples and sent them for testing, which showed that they were fish blood. It turned out that Clay had intentionally covered the car with fish blood to throw the forensic experts off. When the house was inspected, it was noticed that the floor had no carpet. A section of the floor had been cut out, leaving a noticeable mark. Small drops of blood were found on the basement hallway wall. There were signs that furniture had been moved. Something unusual was going on in the house. The forensic team checked under the floor and discovered a bloody carpet. Blood and carpet samples were sent to the lab for analysis. The police tracked Jacques' last movements. At 1:10 a.m., she was seen at a pharmacy with her ex-husband. They appeared to be normal. 2 hours later, Jacques was caught on camera. ATM security recorded the withdrawal. Jacques did not appear on the surveillance camera afterward, while Clay did. Hours later, Clay, his son, and his new girlfriend went to a toy store. They then went to a car wash in his pickup truck, which had a suspicious trash can inside. Clay changed clothes and washed the car and boat. Suspicion grew around Clay, and he became the prime suspect. Police released photos of Clay's pickup truck and boat, asking any witnesses who saw them to come forward. A young couple reported seeing Clay near Devil's Island on the Mississippi River, which was later confirmed by Clay's cell phone records. This prompted police to conduct a search of the area, but despite their efforts, nothing was found. At that time, forensic testing revealed that drops of blood found in Clay's home matched those of the missing woman, Jacques. Based on this evidence, the police suspected that Jacques was likely dead. The police brought Clay in for questioning and attempted to get him to confess to the murder. However, he refused to admit to any wrongdoing, instead claiming that it was old blood from a domestic violence incident in the kitchen. Without a body, the police could not arrest a suspect and charge him. They released Clay but continued to monitor and investigate him. Clay, who had worked as a deputy sheriff, knew full well that the police were watching him, and he played a cat-and-mouse game with them. He would go to deserted vacant lots to disrupt the investigation while the entire neighborhood was involved in the search for Jacques, the missing mother of 3 children. Clay continued to harass the search party and Jacques' family. He drove by, insulting them and yelling that they were wasting their time, claiming that they wouldn't find anything. His defiant behavior raised more and more suspicions. Meanwhile, Jacques' sister, Cheryl, sought custody of the triplets, fearing for their safety as Clay was their father. Clay's erratic behavior eventually led to Cheryl gaining custody, which angered him even more. He began threatening Cheryl with violence, even posting about it on social media. Cheryl recorded these threats and reported them to the police. Nearly 5 months after Jacques' disappearance, police arrested Clay and charged him with making threats to death. Although he admitted to the charges, Clay claimed he acted out of anger and despair over losing custody of the children, with no intention of harming Cheryl. He believes he is the victim in this situation. During the investigation, police discover that Clay is being accused of stealing $50,000 from a previous company and stalking a man. Despite this, Clay denies any involvement in Jacques' disappearance. When questioned, Clay claims that Jacques' new lover, Harry, is responsible for her death. However, police investigate Harry and discover that he has a solid alibi, eliminating him as a suspect. The evidence points to Clay, but he continues to deny any wrongdoing. He is eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for threatening his wife's sister, Cheryl. Police continue to investigate Jacques' disappearance, searching Devil's Island but finding no trace of her. 2 years after her disappearance, police had gathered enough circumstantial evidence, including video footage and blood found in Clay's home, to charge him with Jacques' murder, even though her body had never been found. It was a risky move, because if they lost, the DA's office would not be able to charge him a second time. However, the prosecutor was determined. Clay, after consulting with his attorney, made a deal with the prosecutor to reduce his sentence. Clay offered to plead guilty to murder and provide a burial site. Jacques' family agreed to the deal because it was important to find her body and give her a proper burial. Clay led police to his ex-wife's burial site. It was located in a remote location on a sandbar on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River. The initial investigation was hampered because Clay could not remember the exact tree in which he had buried Jacques' body. However, he eventually revealed that he had placed a bag of fertilizer on top of her grave. A gardener pointed out that large amounts of fertilizer could kill trees, leading the police to focus on 3 dead trees in the area. When they dug up the grave, they found Jacques' body under one of the trees, wearing the same clothes she had last worn. The woman was identified from dental records as Jacques Waller. The discovery of Jacques' body brought closure to her loved ones, who were finally able to hold a funeral for her. Ironically, the ceremony was held on her parents' 50th wedding anniversary. At this time, Cheryl had to tell her children that their mother had died and that their father was responsible for her death. This revelation was devastating to the children, who not only lost their mother, but also their relationship with their father. The children immediately shunned Clay and refused to communicate with him. As part of his plea agreement, Clay was required to provide a detailed confession of his crimes. According to his statement, he began thinking about murder a year before Jacques died, after she announced that she wanted to end their relationship. Despite these dark thoughts, he initially pushed them aside because Jacques was the mother of his children. Clay felt he couldn't let Jacques take his children. He had warned her earlier that if she continued to do so, things would not end well for her, but she chose to ignore him. The night before the murder, he had dug a grave for Jacques on Devil's Island. It was then that he began to consider taking her life. At the time, their divorce seemed to be going smoothly. After visiting a lawyer, the couple had a conversation in which Jacques suggested they have one last intimate encounter together. They went to his house, where they continued the conversation in the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator to find a snack. When he raised his head, he accidentally hit Jacques on the head, causing her nose to bleed. This enraged her, and she stormed out into the hallway. She began screaming that he would never see their children again. This was Clay's breaking point. In a fit of rage, he punched her in the face and then strangled her. After the fight, he dumped Jacques' body in a prepared grave on Devil's Island. He then cleaned up the crime scene by washing his car, cleaning the house, and showering. He changed into new clothes and attempted to resume his normal routine by meeting his new girlfriend and son at a toy store, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Clay claimed the murder was an impulsive act driven by emotion. contradicting his earlier statement about digging the grave the day before. This inconsistency raised suspicions of premeditated murder. The medical examiner's report showed that the victim had suffered multiple skull fractures, consistent with blunt force trauma rather than a simple fight. Clay's initial story was not believed. Clay seemed content with his 20-year sentence for second-degree murder, showing no remorse for killing his ex-wife Jock. However, the prosecution had a surprising twist. The hole he dug to bury Jock was in another state, Illinois, and the murder took place in Missouri. These features fall under federal laws against domestic violence across states, and he violated them. This allowed him to add 35 years to his sentence. Clay Waller would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of his 55-year sentence. Clay had no idea that his confession would have serious consequences due to a federal law he was unaware of. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Celia Barquin. Celia Barquin was born on July 6, 1996, in Point San Miguel, a village in Cantabria, northern Spain, where her family has lived for 8 generations. She then moved to Iowa on an athletic golf scholarship. Many universities offered her scholarships due to her talent, but she chose Ames, Iowa. With a population of 65,000, Ames was quiet and cozy, reminding her of her hometown in Spain. However, at that time, she did not expect that this decision would be a serious mistake. Celia has a wonderful relationship with her family, who remained in her homeland. Her parents, Maria Rosa and Marcos Barquin, had 2 children, Celia and Andres. Marcos worked as a butcher, and Maria was a saleswoman at a clothing store. However, after their children were born, Maria became a housewife, focusing on raising the children and managing household tasks. The family was not wealthy, they lived modestly but were close-knit and supportive. Their children are their top priority, and their parents did everything to ensure that their children receive a good education and started their lives on the right path. Andres pursued a law degree, while Celia, a talented golfer, earned a scholarship to study in the United States. Celia's mother, who loved golf since childhood, passed on her passion for the sport to Celia. Being smaller than other girls her age, Celia learned to use specific techniques to win. When growing up, her petite figure enabled her to practice continuously to improve her abilities. Her dream was to become a successful professional golfer, not for fame, but to support her parents. Celia often expressed her desire to buy them a house and take care of them. To achieve this, she practiced diligently to improve her skills. Celia has achieved numerous titles and awards for her victories in various competitions. She won the European Women's Amateur Championship in Slovenia in June 2018, placed second in the women's team golf competition in Europe. Was the 2018 Big 12 Women's Golf Champion in the United States, and was named the 2018 Iowa State Athlete of the Year. There were high expectations for her, and many believed she had a bright future. When Celia moved to the United States, her relationship with her family remained strong. She talked to her parents daily, sometimes even 4 or 5 times a day when she had free time. Celia missed her family a lot. A nightly call to say goodnight and share the day's successes was a cherished routine. During vacations, she visited her family in Spain. Even while on vacation, she continued to train hard to improve her skills. Her mother supported her passion and often trained with her. Celia was comfortably settled in Iowa, living with her boyfriend, Carlos Nigri Nabeles, in a rented apartment. When Celia and Carlos met at the university, she was dating someone else, but Carlos fell in love with her at first sight. Her charming smile, piercing gaze, cheerfulness, and kindness captured his heart. And her determination and perseverance earned his deep respect. Although Carlos had to accept that she was with someone else, but he became her best friend and consistently supported her. For over a year, he stood by her side, then she became disillusioned with her boyfriend and broke up with him. After another walk together, Carlos finally confessed his feelings, and Celia pulled him by the shirt, kissed him, and without saying a word, left in a car. He was so happy she felt the same way that he ran around his room shouting with joy. That's how their romance started. To celebrate the beginning of their relationship, Carlos even set off fireworks to impress her and sent her a video where he told her she was amazing and one in a million. From then on, they were inseparable, and over time, they moved in together and started living together. Lately, their conversations were filled with dreams about their wedding venue and even the names of their future children. They were already engaged and planning the most important event of their lives for May 2017. Carlos had graduated from college and secured a job at an engineering firm in Ames. Celia was in her final semester at Iowa State University, also majoring in civil engineering. After completing her athletic career, she aspired to become an engineer and make a positive impact on people, wanting to demonstrate that women can succeed in construction as well. Celia excelled in her studies and successfully showed that women can thrive in this field. Celia had many friends and enjoyed surprising them with delicious Spanish dishes that she cooked very well. Among the university students, a popular video showed her skillfully tossing a Spanish omelet, flipping it in the air, and adding butter to make it burst like a fireball. Her friends loved this performance and often asked her to repeat it. In the summer of 2018, Celia spent her time in Spain with her family before returning to Iowa to graduate. She was a promising athlete on the Iowa State women's golf team and also competed individually. She was preparing for an upcoming competition. But unfortunately, those plans did not materialize. Celia's assassin has been following her and he has also planned an attack. On the ill-fated day of September 17, 2018, Celia arrived at the golf club after finishing a conversation with her mother. The staff, familiar with she, informed her that a group of 15 older men from Des Moines would also be playing golf. At 8:45, the group was sent to the starting line near the first 4 holes. Celia watched them arrive in golf carts and start playing. The retirees invited her to go ahead and start her game. Celia pushed the golf club to the first hole and then moved to the 4th hole to avoid delaying the older men. The seniors described her as polite and friendly. She then proceeded to the 7th hole, which was unpopular due to its distance from the other holes and its location next to Squaw Creek Park, known for dense vegetation. Athletes often avoided this area because it was sometimes frequented by unauthorized park visitors and aggressive homeless people. However, Celia was not familiar with this club and unaware of its thing, so she went there. To reach the 9th hole, players must cross a bridge along a wide path and then pass through a wooded area. One coach described this area as eerie, likening it to Sleepy Hollow. Celia went in that direction. Later, at around 10:30 a.m., a group of 15 people arrived in the area and found Celia's golf stick with her belongings, but Celia was not there. While the group played, they noticed that Celia hadn't appeared even after 10 minutes, which was unusual. Concerned, they decided to approach Celia's golf stick and look for her. Upon closer inspection, they found her t-shirt, baseball cap, and other items scattered on the ground, with her phone left. While it seemed some items might have accidentally fallen from her pocket, the presence of her t-shirt and the abandoned phone was puzzling. They searched the surrounding area but did not find anyone. Subsequently, they notified the club management to report this troubling discovery. The group reported seeing a young, blonde girl playing golf earlier, but now she was missing, and her belongings were left behind. The staff who arrived recognized her as Celia and began searching for her. In less than half an hour, they found a body floating in the pond near the 9th hole and called the police. Once the body was retrieved from the water, police identified her as Celia Barquin, the reigning European champion. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and torso. A search dog quickly picked up a scent and led officers to a tent in a wooded area of Squaw Creek Park. The tent was empty, but there was blood inside. The police suspected that a homeless man had been living there and might have attacked Celia, so they began searching for him. While the police were searching the area, a man approached them. He introduced himself as Colin Richards and mentioned that he lived nearby and was there to collect his tent. Colin, like Celia, was 22 years old, but they were complete opposites. The police suspected him of the murder because his face was covered in scratches. In a black backpack he carried, they discovered bloody clothes, a t-shirt and shorts, which he had replaced with clean ones. Search dogs also detected his scent. Additionally, he had a deep gash on his left arm, from which blood was oozing, and he attempted to conceal it from the officers. Based on this evidence, Colin Richards was taken into custody by the police. He was at a friend's house before the police arrived, according to Colin. Two male acquaintances took him to the park to get his tent. When he went to retrieve it, he saw the police. He denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he had never met Celia. He said the scratches on his face were from branches he encountered while walking through the woods. Colin was known to the police for substance abuse, alcohol issues, and mental health problems. He became homeless after being released from prison 3 months before the murder. He had served about 7 months in jail for burglary and had multiple prior convictions for similar offenses, with many criminal records. Colin grew up in a dysfunctional family and was known to the police since his teenage years. Detectives interviewed 3 men who were acquaintances of his. One of these men shared a tent with Colin, while the other 2 gave him a ride from his home to the park. The homeowner allowed Colin to wash and change his clothes because he was dirty and covered in mud, blood, sand, and water. After cleaning up and changing his clothes, Colin left with his bloody clothes in a black backpack to return to the park for his tent. He intended to leave the area afterward. According to the men, Colin was acting unusual that day, extremely nervous, and very to leave. He didn't explain his sudden decision, only mentioning that he had cut himself badly and dirted his clothes. Another homeless man who lived with Colin in a tent at the park mentioned that he always carried a serrated knife, which he used for household tasks. A day before the murder, Colin confessed to this friend his desire to rape and kill someone. But that man thought he was just joking. Colin was charged with first-degree murder right after Celia's body was found. Investigators believed the crime was premeditated. They thought he had planned to kill someone and was looking for a she that day. The judge set bail at $5 million, but Colin, of course, didn't have that kind of money, so he remained in custody until his trial. Meanwhile, Celia's family in Spain had no idea about these tragic incidents, but they were very worried because she hadn't called them or answered their calls and messages. Police aides tried to contact their colleagues in Point San Miguel and the embassy staff in Madrid to inform Celia's family about the terrible news, but it was already past midnight in Spain and no one was working. Therefore, Celia's coach had to call her parents to inform them of their daughter's incident. After many hours of not hearing from Celia, the parents learned that their daughter had been brutally murdered. Later, a serrated knife was discovered in a wooded area, bearing the fingerprints and DNA of Colin. Furthermore, the blood found under Celia's fingernails contained fragments of Colin's skin, confirming that these Colin scratches were caused by Celia, not by branches. Initially, he denied his guilt, but eventually, overwhelmed by the evidence, he confessed. He admitted to using substances that day and not thinking clearly. He saw a beautiful young woman alone in the woods and decided she would be the perfect target. Colin had never met or known Celia before, and she was an unintended victim of his violent outburst. Since the death penalty has been abolished in Iowa since 1965, he faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Colin's family attended the trial and shared details about his upbringing. His parents were never married or living together when he was born. For the first 10 years of his life, Colin lived with his father, who was strict with him. His father often sent him to bed alone while he went out to the bar. During this time, only Colin's grandparents looked after him. Later, his mother fought for custody and took Colin to live with her. By then, she had remarried and had 2 more children. They moved to the countryside, believing it was more peaceful. The family maintained strict discipline, and Colin's room was so tidy that they joked he should join the army. Colin was a diligent student, but as a teenager, he grew close to his alcoholic father and began having behavioral issues. His father attempted to discipline him, but Colin didn't listen, leading to his expulsion from the house at age 15. He fell in with a bad crowd, left school, and became addicted to alcohol and drugs. At 18, Colin had a girlfriend twice his age. In May 2015, he was arrested for domestic violence against her, found guilty, and sentenced to 60 days in jail. On another occasion, after being accused of shoplifting, he threatened to return and shoot up the place. Colin's life went out of control, but no one seemed to notice. After the domestic violence case, he was arrested multiple times over the next 2 years for theft, assault, harassment, and attempted burglary. Although he was sent to behavioral intervention courses, they didn't work. In November 2017, Colin was sentenced to 2 years at Mount Pleasant Correctional Facility for burglary in violating probation. Despite having disciplinary issues, including fights with other inmates, he was released on parole after just 7 months in June 2018 due to overcrowding in the prison. Only 3 months after his release, he killed Celia. After being released from prison, Colin was taken home by his mother and stepfather and lived with them. They had reconnected with him during his time in prison through letters. His parents trusted him and gave him an opportunity for a fresh start, believing his promise to avoid drugs and cut ties with bad influences. However, just 2 weeks later, they had to ask him to leave for breaking his promise. Colin then went to Ames, about an hour away from his home. He stayed briefly at the city's only homeless shelter, but there were not enough beds available. Seeking assistance from his mother, she bought him a tent. In his new city, the Ames Police Department soon noticed him. On June 29th, he was arrested for public intoxication. On August 11th, the police received a complaint from a Target store saying that Colin and another homeless man were camping on open land behind the store and were chased away. They then moved to camp in Squaw Creek Park to avoid bothering anyone. According to Colin, the police allowed them to camp there, but police representatives deny this, stating that camping overnight in the park is prohibited. On September 2nd, 15 days before Celia's murder, police were called to a Burger King where Colin threatened customers with a knife but was later released. On September 8th, his mother and stepfather visited to celebrate Colin's 22nd birthday. They took him out for dinner and to a laundromat to wash his clothes. His mother was concerned about his behavior. Colin was quiet and distant, responding to their questions with only one-word answers. They dropped him off at a tent in the park where he was living with another homeless man and then drove home. It was then that Colin confessed to his friend that he wanted to rape and kill a woman. The next morning, Celia was found dead, but she had not been raped. According to the police, he probably didn't have time to commit the act. Colin's parents said it was his own fault. They tried to help him, but it didn't work. He still chose to side with evil. Therefore, on August 23, 2019, Colin Richards was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the Story County Jail in Nevada, Iowa. The whole town of Ames mourns Celia's death, with thousands attending a candlelight ceremony to honor she, the talented athlete. Celia's family was devastated by the news of her murder. They were furious that someone with no achievements or aspirations had cruelly taken the life of a talented and promising athlete with a bright future. Collins clearly had no regard for Celia's life. He randomly chose and killed her simply because he felt like it, believing she was an easy target. The Celia family was relieved by the verdict and grateful that the culprit was swiftly caught and could no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Now, he will remain imprisoned forever. Their only regret is allowing their daughter to go so far away, despite it being her dream. Statistically, the US is not safe. The murder rate per capita in the US is 26 times higher than in Spain. In their small town in Spain, there hasn't been a murder in 100 years. Celia's parents have kept her room just as she left it, with one addition: an engineering degree awarded posthumously by the state of Iowa. They often walk through the local golf club and remember when their daughter first started playing the sport there. The community in the small town of Ames, including the university administration and students, was outraged by the crime. The situation was particularly concerning because the golf course was next to a wooded area without any fencing. Due to the golf club's negligence, a girl's life was put in danger. This wasn't the first murder in the neighborhood. Back in 2008, a man was killed in a stabbing incident, and the homeless attacker was convicted of murder. After Celia's tragic death, her boyfriend Carlos found it too painful to stay in a town full of memories of her. He then moved to Florida. Celia's brother was greatly affected by her death, losing a lot of weight from stress. He decided to join the police force after earning a law degree, aiming to help others. This career choice was inspired by his sister, who encouraged him to find his purpose. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Shannon Medill. Shannon Medill was born in 1989 in Alberta, Canada. She spent years honing her acting skills. Her journey was challenging, but she was ready to start a new chapter in her life. On November 26, 2014, Shannon auditioned and was selected. But before she could celebrate her achievement, she disappeared without a trace. After a day passed without Shannon returning home, her family's worries grew as no one could reach her. Shannon's family was confused. Not knowing what could have happened, they called her cell phone, sent messages on all social media platforms, and left emails. But Shannon did not respond. Her behavior was unusual and completely out of character. Shannon's family contacted the police, but they stressed that Shannon was an adult who had the right to come and go without informing anyone. However, Shannon's family insisted that this behavior was out of character for her and that a search had to be launched. Fearing that something terrible might have happened, Shannon was the youngest of 4 children. From a young age, she loved being the center of attention and was very creative. She loved to sing and began performing in small shows in kindergarten. Showcasing her acting talent during her school years, ultimately did not complete her studies. Choosing instead to focus on her acting skills, Shannon spent her days attending auditions and interviews, but she was constantly rejected. However, during this time, she found an opportunity in comedy and began performing stand-up, which helped her become famous in 2010. When Shannon turned 21, she attended a party with friends to relax there. She met Joshua Burgess. He was quite different from Shannon, but they quickly connected, and these differences eventually helped balance each other out. The couple enjoyed spending time together, watching TV and playing video games. They shared many interests, which strengthened their relationship. After 4 years of dating, the couple decided to get married. In May 2014, Shannon began planning her wedding. With Joshua's active support, their wedding, attended by only their closest family members, was a joyous event. However, the couple did not seem completely happy. Over the next month, Shannon focused on her acting career, attending more auditions, some of which took place in Edmonton, a city 3 hours north of Calgary, where she lived with her husband This meant she spent a lot of time traveling between the two places. Shannon has appeared in numerous television shows, voiced audiobooks, and even acted in plays. She has often expressed her belief that great success awaits her in Edmonton. On November 26, 2014, 25-year-old Shannon and her brother Brett had planned to meet at the Calgary Theatre. Prior to their meeting, Shannon had auditioned for a show and she was accepted. Marking a major milestone in her journey to pursue her dreams, Brett was waiting for Shannon at the theater, and he understood how important the event was to her. As the minutes ticked by, his anxiety grew. He couldn't reach her. Shannon ignored his messages. Eventually, he had no choice but to leave. He tried calling her the next morning, but she still didn't answer. Brett contacted their parents, but they were also confused about the situation. His mother suggested that Shannon's work schedule might have changed. She mentioned that sometimes, when Shannon worked the night shift, she would sleep during the day. However, this explanation didn't seem plausible. Shannon usually paid attention to her phone calls because it was important for her to stay in touch and not miss anything significant. To reassure herself, their mother thought that when Shannon woke up in the evening, she would realize she had missed the calls and would eventually call back. A voicemail message was left for Shannon, and her family assured her that they were not angry with her. They just wanted her to let them know she was safe. Unfortunately, she did not respond, worried that something was wrong. Her relatives, including her husband Joshua, went to the police for help. They reported her missing and speculated that she might have been in an accident while traveling to or from Edmonton. Initially, the police were slow to act on their request, but after some persuasion, they began to get involved. Eventually, the police launched a search operation. Hospitals were checked, but no accidents were reported that day. The following days were a blur. Family members anxiously awaited any news. During this time, Shannon did not shop, did not use any credit cards, and there were no activity records on her car. As if she had disappeared, she also stopped using her social media accounts, where she often shared updates about her acting career. Unexpectedly, a few days later, Joshua reported to the police that he had found Shannon's cell phone in her pants pocket at home. He also discovered her car, but the police did not find anything suspicious. Nearly 2 weeks passed without any news until the police found some unusual photos. 2 photos of a girl with her hair covering her face were found attached to a tree in a Calgary park, although the identity could not be confirmed. The girl bore a strong resemblance to Shannon, especially due to her bright red hair. It appeared that a potential kidnapper was taunting the police. Search efforts were organized in Big Sugar Creek, one of Canada's largest parks. Several teams were formed, including volunteers and Shannon's family members. For 2 days, police scoured a large area, assisted by specially trained dogs and a rescue helicopter that surveyed the park from the air. Unfortunately, these efforts were unsuccessful. It was later discovered that the images that prompted the search were part of an art project created by local university students. Realizing that their photos had been mistakenly taken as evidence in connection with the case, the students contacted the police to clarify the situation. During this time, her family anxiously awaited news, but there were no clues regarding Shannon's whereabouts. It was unclear whether she would ever be found alive. The idea of a kidnapping seemed unlikely, as no ransom was demanded, nor had the family been contacted. Joshua revealed a previously unknown fact to the police. He explained that his wife had been struggling with her acting career for years. One evening, she called him and confessed that she had considered jumping off a bridge during a particularly difficult time. She had just suffered another disappointment after auditioning for a role in a television series she had hoped to land. Fortunately, she was able to overcome the emotional pain, but she later suffered a nervous breakdown. The police were concerned that such a traumatic experience might have led her to consider end life. Police and divers searched rivers in the area, hoping to find any sign of her. Unfortunately, despite exhaustive searches along the riverbank for miles, they found no clues, and the investigation hit a dead end. By May 2015, nearly 6 months after Shannon disappeared, the police still had no clue as to her whereabouts. During this time, an experienced police officer named Christine took over the investigation, having worked in the homicide division for many years. She was known for her determination and attention to detail. Her previous efforts had led to the arrest of many dangerous criminals, and she was committed to solving this case. Christine decided to investigate those close to Shannon. She wanted to learn more about her husband, Joshua, from the beginning. He seemed like a kind and positive person. He cooperated fully with the police, allowing them to search his home twice and readily answering their questions. He also supported Shannon's family when they went to the police station to report her disappearance. Even after she went missing, the family kept in touch with Joshua, comforting each other and holding out hope. When asked about the possibility that Joshua was involved in Shannon's disappearance, all of her relatives responded that he could never hurt his wife. However, during discussions with Shannon's family about her husband, Joshua, the police made a surprising discovery. The couple had been married for over 7 months at the time of the tragic events, but it was only now, 6 months after Shannon's disappearance, that it was revealed that they had an open marriage. This meant that they were in an unconventional relationship where both Joshua and Shannon could have other partners. Joshua claimed that he proposed this arrangement and that Shannon agreed. Although she did not seem particularly interested in it, Shannon's family was also aware of the arrangement. This arrangement allowed Joshua and Shannon to explore their private lives more freely, especially when Joshua was dating other women. According to Joshua, they had no disputes about their open marriage. Surprisingly, Shannon knew about all of her husband's affairs and had even met some of his girlfriends. Officer Christine discovered that Joshua had had about 7 affairs during their marriage. It was important to interview all of his girlfriends. The police were then able to locate and question them without any difficulty. According to the investigation, Joshua's last girlfriend shared some intriguing details. She continued to see him even after Shannon went missing. This girlfriend revealed information that the police had never heard before. They discovered that just before Shannon went missing, there had been a serious conflict between her and Joshua concerning the openness of their relationship. When Shannon decided to end their open marriage, Joshua's girlfriend stated that to avoid further conflict, he agreed with Shannon's decision. However, a week later, Shannon discovered that Joshua was still in contact with his girlfriend. Despite his promise to end the relationship, she found out because he had locked his phone, which was unusual, as they had previously been free to check each other's devices. When Joshua gave her the password, Shannon discovered that instead of breaking up with his mistress, he had decided to marry her, making Shannon the second person in his life. Joshua claims he is planning to file for divorce soon. Shannon felt deeply betrayed after throwing away Joshua's phone. She carefully considered her situation and made some important decisions, including moving from Calgary to Edmonton. She was in the process of implementing this plan at the time of her disappearance. During this period, she continued to live with Joshua, but they arranged their schedules to avoid seeing each other. Their relationship was extremely strained. Shannon often worked night shifts, while Joshua had a completely different schedule, causing them to barely see one another. According to the investigation, Shannon's life ended on November 27, 2014. After that day, all her banking transactions stopped. She ceased using the internet, and her phone went silent at noon. However, a signal from her phone was detected in an alley in the city the next morning. Joshua later claimed that he had found the phone at home. Interestingly, a few days later, Joshua also discovered Shannon's car, but could not explain how he found it. All of this seemed very suspicious to Officer Christine. Christine decided to speak to Joshua again. Meanwhile, an application to confiscate Joshua's phone had been filed, as he was increasingly considered a prime suspect in Shannon's case. In addition, the police decided to confiscate the car. On June 2, 2015, 7 months after Shannon's disappearance, Police Christine, along with other police, went to Joshua's house. They brought a search warrant to confiscate his cell phone and car. The officers knocked on the door and asked to enter the house. But initially, Joshua did not answer. After a while, he responded to the police and announced that he would be coming out soon. It appeared that Joshua was moving around inside, possibly trying to buy time to hide something. He answered the second police call, but explained the delay by saying that he was looking for his pants. Joshua spoke from behind a closed door and was asked to come out. Regardless of his appearance, the police sensed that something important was happening inside. They were prepared for any eventuality, including the use of weapons. Suddenly, he burst into tears and confessed to killing Shannon. After some persuasion, he finally opened the door. The police entered and saw Joshua bleeding. On the floor next to him was a military knife, which he had used to commit end life. He was rushed to the hospital. Joshua had lost a significant amount of blood, but he was not in critical condition and did not require surgery. The doctors were able to stitch up his wound. A psychiatric evaluation was needed to determine whether he was a danger to himself or others. When Joshua was taken into the interrogation room, he only said that he would confess his love to Shannon if he could see her alive, and he did not say anything else. Meanwhile, the police searched Joshua's home with the help of sniffer dogs. Later, they discovered a body buried in the yard, and during the excavation, they found enough evidence to secure a conviction. However, they still wanted to obtain a confession and hear Joshua's account of the events. On the second day after his arrest, Joshua provided a detailed account of the events on the day Shannon went missing. He returned home and found her sitting on the couch. She appeared very upset and immediately accused him of cheating, calling him a traitor for the affair. In a fit of rage, she lost control and said many harsh words to him. Unable to bear her accusations, Joshua tried to cover her mouth with his hand. In response, Shannon bit him and continued to insult him, expressing her disgust at his attempts to touch her. In a fit of rage, Joshua grabbed Shannon by the neck and began to strangle her until she stopped breathing. When he realized she was dead, he became frightened and was unable to call an ambulance because she was dead. When Joshua recounted this, he became emotional, cried, and clearly felt remorse for his actions. Finally, the confession brought him relief after 8 long months of carrying this secret. During this time, Shannon's body lay in their home. Despite being checked twice by the police, they ignored the containers on the back porch, which were hidden under trash bags to avoid detection. Joshua Burgess was charged with second-degree murder. Shannon's family eventually learned the truth about what had happened, shocking everyone to discover that the killer had been near them the entire time. Even helping to find Shannon, Joshua's trial attracted considerable public and media attention. Despite his remorse, Joshua did not want to make his confession public and refused to attend the trial. Shannon's family believed that he was a coward who did not dare to face Shannon's loved ones. The prosecutor's office and the family contended that it was a premeditated murder and that he was still trying to hide the evidence. He acted as if nothing had happened, hoping to escape prosecution and punishment. At the last minute, the jury found Joshua Burgess guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. With the possibility of parole after 10 years, the family of the Shannon was unhappy with this sentence. They believed that it was Joshua's lifestyle that led to the end of Shannon's life. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of John Allen Chow. We'll embark on a journey to the enigmatic North Sentinel Island in the Andaman Islands, India, to explore the lives of the Sentinelese. The island's inhabitants, they live in complete isolation from the modern world, maintaining a hunter-gatherer lifestyle that dates back tens of thousands of years. Known for their hostility towards outsiders, their language, beliefs, and social structure remain largely unknown, making them a symbol of prehistoric isolation. Tourism has been rapidly developing on the Andaman Islands, attracting visitors from around the world to experience its breathtaking natural beauty. Travelers come to admire the majestic mangrove forests, stroll through lush, tropical jungles, relax on pristine sandy beaches, and savor fresh local cuisine. However, let's turn our focus to North Sentinel Island. This isolated island spans nearly 60 square kilometers and has a roughly circular, shield-like shape. It typically enjoys bright sunshine, but also experiences seasonal winds and monsoons. Satellite images reveal that the island is surrounded by coral reefs and sandy beaches. Almost the entire island, apart from the coastline, is covered by dense tropical forest. Despite thousands of satellite images being taken, the thick forest canopy conceals anything beneath it. Adding to the island's enduring mystery, it is important to note that visiting North Sentinel Island has been strictly prohibited since 1956 under the Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Act for the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It is illegal to approach the island. A restricted zone of 8 kilometers has been established around it. The Indian Coast Guard regularly patrols the surrounding waters, and anyone attempting to enter the island faces severe penalties, including heavy fines and imprisonment. Additionally, visiting many nearby islands also requires official permits. The Sentinelese remain isolated, fiercely defending their territory despite efforts to make contact. Nearly all attempts have failed. If someone were stranded on the island, Indian authorities would not intervene. Their population is estimated between 80 to 150 individuals. As no official count has been made, they rely on a diet of wild boar, fish, shellfish, and plants, avoiding contact with the outside world and fishing only within their lagoon. They remain within their reefs, fishing only in their lagoons while they use canoes. These are limited to shallow waters, where they propel themselves forward with long poles that reach the seabed. So, the Sentinelese are believed to be unable to move in deep waters, as they have not developed the use of oars. Physically, they are distinctive, broad, muscular, and relatively short. With an average height of about 1.6 meters, none of them are obese. Interestingly, the Sentinelese place high value on metal. During their rare interactions with the outside world, they have been seen using arrows with metal tips. In 1974, they took aluminum cookware left behind by the National Geographic Society. The first recorded observation of the Sentinelese occurred in 1771, when Indian sailors passing by noticed a fire on the island's shore. Almost a century later, in 1867, an Indian merchant ship ran aground on one of the island's reefs. The crew reached the shore in search of food and water, but after 3 days, they were attacked by a group of islanders. At the time, no one knew anything about the Sentinelese. In the end, the crew was rescued by a naval team in their rush to escape. The sailors abandoned the damaged vessel and fled to safety. In January 1880, British naval officer Maurice Vidal Portman led an expedition to North Sentinel Island to establish contact with the indigenous people. However, when his team arrived, they could not find any Sentinelese, as the inhabitants had seemingly hidden out of fear. The team followed trails that led to an abandoned village, but no one was there. After several days of fruitless searching, they finding abandoned villages and roads, his team captured 6 people, including an elderly man, a woman, and 4 children. The man and woman died of disease shortly after their arrival in Port Blair, and the children also began to fall ill. Portman hastily sent the children back to North Sentinel Island with a large supply of gifts in an attempt to establish friendly relations. Portman visited the island again in 1883, 1885, and 1887, but all were unsuccessful. In 1896, a prisoner escaped from the Great Andaman Island detention camp on a makeshift raft and drifted to North Sentinel Beach. His body was discovered by a search party a few days later with multiple arrow wounds and a cut throat. On August 2, 1981, the MV Primrose, carrying a large cargo of chicken feed from Bangladesh to Australia, ran aground in rough seas near North Sentinel Island, trapping its small crew. After several days, the captain sent a distress signal, reporting that more than 50 armed islanders were preparing boats to approach the ship. However, heavy waves prevented the islanders from reaching the vessel, and their arrows were deflected. The 31-member crew had to stay vigilant, armed with axes, pipes, and flare weapons. Nearly a week later, the crew was evacuated by a civilian helicopter chartered by the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation with the assistance of the Indian Navy. After the evacuation, the Sentinelese scavenged the abandoned shipwrecks for iron to use in making weapons. Muhammad, a scrap metal dealer contracted by the government to dismantle the Primrose, recorded friendly exchanges of fruit and small pieces of metal with the Sentinelese, who often approached the wreck at low tide. 2 days later, in the early morning, 3 Sentinelese canoes, carrying about a dozen men, approached the Primrose, initially apprehensive. The crew threw bananas to the islanders in an attempt to attract them and reduce the possibility of conflict over the next 18 months. The Sentinelese regularly visited the crew while they continued salvage work on the abandoned ship. In 1991, the first instances of peaceful contact with the Sentinelese were recorded during 2 regular expeditions conducted by an Indian anthropological team, which included representatives from various government agencies, as well as anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay. This marked the first time a woman on an expedition made contact with the Sentinelese during the visit on January 4, 1991. The Sentinelese initially approached the team unarmed. They accepted the coconuts offered to them, but retreated when the team signaled for them to come closer. The team returned to the main ship, MV Tarmugli, and later returned to the island in the afternoon, where they found at least 24 Sentinelese on the beach. One of the men aimed a bow and arrow at the team, but a woman pushed the arrow down, prompting the man to bury his weapon in the sand. For the first time, the Sentinelese approached the boats quite closely. The tribal welfare director then personally handed over 5 bags of coconuts. In 1995, the Indian government decided not to forcibly contact or assimilate the Sentinelese into modern civilization. By 1996, all visits to North Sentinel Island were completely stopped. In 2004, a massive tsunami devastated the Indian Ocean region, displacing hundreds of thousands of people and claiming many lives. This natural disaster also significantly affected North Sentinel Island. Tectonic activity caused the island and nearby seabed to rise by almost 2 meters. This uplift exposed the surrounding coral reef, which dried out and eventually died. These changes are visible in satellite images starting in 2004. Following the tsunami, an Indian helicopter flew over the island to check if the Sentinelese needed assistance. The islanders, however, emerged and aimed their arrows at the helicopter, clearly signaling they wanted no contact. In 2018, John Allen Chow, a Christian missionary, attempted to visit North Sentinel Island. Believing he was uniquely capable of conquering its isolation, John was born on December 18, 1991, in Scottsboro, Alabama. His father, Patrick Chow, a Chinese-American psychiatrist, while his mother, Linda Adams Chow, was an organizer for Chi Alpha. John grew up in a warm and loving family with an older brother and sister. Both of his parents were devout Christians, contributing to their successful academic careers. While his siblings pursued college and careers in medicine, John chose a different path. He developed a strong passion for Christianity and travel. John loved outdoor activities and often went hiking with friends. From a young age, he dreamed of living on an uninhabited island, combining his passion for adventure and his faith. He decided to become a missionary. He traveled extensively, meeting people and spreading the Christian faith. At the age of 17, he learned about the isolated North Sentinel Island and its inhabitants. John believed he could help the Sentinelese by introducing them to Christianity and connecting them with God. In 2015, John took his first trip to the Andaman Islands. Although he avoided getting too close to North Sentinel Island, he began studying the area. building connection, and preparing for a future mission. He returned home without visiting the island he had dreamed of, but resolved to go back. By 2016, John was living in California, working as a guide, and traveling across the United States. Next year, he also organized a missionary training camp to teach others how to engage with remote tribes. John became deeply fixated on North Sentinel Island and frequently discussed it with friends and family. He shared his plans to visit the island. John believed it was his divine mission to tell the Sentinelese about God and bring light to their dark world. In October 2018, John traveled to Port Blair to prepare for his trip to the island. He created picture cards for communication, collected gifts for the islanders, and bought medical supplies and other essential items to prioritize the safety of the Sentinelese to minimize health risks. He vaccinated himself against common viruses and self-quarantined for 11 days, despite efforts. John could not secure official permission, making his trip illegal under Indian law. Determined to proceed, he approached local fishermen and eventually convinced 3 of them to take him close to the island for $400 late on the night of November 14, 2018. The fishermen secretly took John aboard their motorboat and set out to sea. Their destination was about 60 miles away. By early morning on November 15, they reached the waters near North Sentinel Island, despite the fishermen's warnings. John left the boat, got into his canoe, and paddled alone toward the shore. As he approached, the Sentinelese noticed him while he was still in the water. They shouted in their language, clearly expressing their displeasure at the unexpected visitor. The islanders exchanged looks and then decided to defend their territory. They aimed their arrows at John, who panicked and quickly retreated to his canoe, paddling as fast as he could. He returned to the motorboat, narrowly escaping harm. Although terrified by the experience, John was deeply disappointed. His mission had failed, and all his efforts felt futile. The next day, John decided to return to the island. As he paddled toward the shore, he heard the cries of the islanders and the sound of drums. Soon, he noticed a man standing on a high coral reef. The man, his chest painted white, said something to John. In an attempt to communicate, John repeated the man's words and sang a prayer in response. The islander laughed loudly. Suddenly, more Sentinelese appeared on the shore. Gathering into a crowd, John offered them gifts, but 2 men dragged his canoe into the dense forest. At one point, a young islander aimed an arrow directly at him. Panicking, John held up his Bible. The arrow struck the Bible, sparing him. Startled and afraid, John fled into the water. He swam as fast as he could. Once he could no longer touch the sea floor. After swimming about a mile, he reached the fisherman's boat that had brought him to the island and managed to escape to safety. Disheartened, that day, he wrote in his journal, "Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold, where none have heard or even had the chance to hear your name? The eternal lives of this tribe is at hand, and I think it's worthwhile to declare Jesus to these people. Please do not be angry at them or at God. If I get killed, don't retrieve my body." Early on the morning of November 17, John set out once more for the wild island, this time in a motorboat with the fishermen. Before switching to his canoe, he wrote in his journal, "I hope this is not my last entry, but if it is, glory to God." Wearing only black shorts, John climbed into his canoe and paddled alone toward North Sentinel Island. For the 3rd time, the fishermen stayed in the motorboat at sea with John's belongings, waiting for him until the afternoon. When John failed to return, they left and went home. The following day, the fishermen returned to the island to observe the shoreline from a distance and search for John. They noticed something unusual on the shore. As they looked closer, they realized it was a motionless man resembling John, dressed in black shorts. While they watched, the Sentinelese came on, dragged the body off the beach, and disappeared into the jungle. Frightened, the fishermen returned to Port Blair and informed John's family of his death. John's parents, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were heartbroken. Though they understood the drastic decision he had made in pursuit of his missionary work, the authorities now faced two key questions: what steps to take next, and whether to attempt retrieving John's body to return it to his homeland. Upon examining John's journal, the police discovered an entry where he had written, "If it happens that I am killed, I ask that my body not be taken from the island." 3 days after John's death, his family shared a post on social network announcing that John had died in India while engaging with the Sentinelese tribe on the Andaman Islands. Part of their message read, "We forgive those reportedly responsible for his death. He went to them willingly, and no one should face prosecution because of his actions." The authorities ultimately decided not to file any criminal charges. The fishermen who had transported John to the remote island were released on bail, despite several attempts by the Indian police to recover John's body. The operation was deemed too dangerous, and officials chose not to proceed. To this day, John's death has not been officially confirmed. His mother, Linda, continues to believe that her son is still alive and living on the island. She tells the media that John will return one day and share the truth himself. Meanwhile, his father, Patrick, holds the missionary organization responsible for John's death, accusing them of pressuring his son into taking such extreme risks and encouraging him to visit the perilous island. The future of the Sentinelese remains uncertain. Will they be able to preserve their way of life on their secluded island? In a way, their independence from the challenges of modern life could even inspire a sense of admiration. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, United States. His father, chemist Lionel Herbert Dahmer, and his mother, Joyce Annette Dahmer, faced various challenges. Joyce struggled with depression and possibly other mental health issues, which required her to take large amounts of medication, even during her pregnancy. Despite these difficulties, their first child, Jeffrey, was born healthy and displayed a cheerful and curious personality in his early years. However, when he was about 5 years old, he developed a double inguinal hernia and required surgery. Initially, Jeffrey was described as an active and cheerful child, but after the surgery, his parents observed a change in his demeanor. He seemed more withdrawn and showed signs of depression. One day, Jeffrey witnessed his father taking an animal carcass from under the house and placing it on a tray. The sight caught Jeffrey's attention, and he became curious. Without hesitation, he began playing with it. His father, Lionel, whose job and academic career required him to move several times, eventually earned a doctorate in chemistry. This achievement led Jeffrey's family to settle in Bath, Ohio, where they found a large plot of land surrounded by trees. After moving to Ohio, Jeffrey began to avoid social interaction, preferring solitude. However, he cherished the time he spent with his father, participating in various activities together, such as fishing. Jeffrey enjoyed watching his father prepare fish and was curious about what was inside them. Lionel noticed this passion in his son and suggested that he learn taxidermy. Although Jeffrey did not experience physical abuse at home, he grew up in a tense atmosphere. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, argued frequently. Lionel often criticized Joyce for not taking good care of their son, while Joyce expressed frustration with Lionel's long hours at work and school, feeling that he was neglecting the family. Over time, they realized that Jeffrey was quite withdrawn and had difficulty connecting with others. When Jeffrey was 7, he got his first pet, a dog. This brought him immense joy, and he took great care of the dog, even bringing it along when he explored the area for animal carcasses. At the same time, Joyce became pregnant with their second child. To help Jeffrey feel included, his parents allowed him to choose a name for his younger brother, which he decided would be David. Jeffrey attended primary school in Bath, where his father made efforts to encourage him to socialize with other children. Although these efforts were largely unsuccessful, on weekends, Lionel spent time with Jeffrey, tending to the garden and bees together, and attending local fairs. Their relationship was strong, and Jeffrey even wrote poems for his father during this time. His mother, Joyce, was hospitalized for depression and anxiety, which was a difficult period for the family. When Jeffrey entered secondary school, he continued to enjoy dissecting animals and began to explore his abuse. During this time, he kissed a boy from the neighborhood, which led him to realize that he was attracted to boys. Although he struggled to accept this part of himself, Jeffrey faced increasing anxiety due to his father Lionel's homophobic views. Throughout high school, he endured bullying. To cope with the challenges around him, he turned to alcohol. This dependence on alcohol led him to come to school drunk and even drink during class. As a result, he was often reprimanded and disciplined. His behavior varied greatly. Sometimes he was the center of attention, while at other times he was very shy in school. Jeffrey often engaged in behavior that was considered humorous or eccentric. He acted as the class clown, frequently imitating epileptic seizures and making sheep noises during class. As he grew older, he even began drawing chalk sketches of human bodies on the classroom floor. Around the age of 14 or 15, Jeffrey began to experience disturbing obsessive thoughts related to sex. This struggle intensified over time, leading him to develop various fantasies. However, unlike typical teenage fantasies, Jeffrey's were more disturbing. Jeffrey found his senior year of high school particularly challenging. Because his parents decided to get a divorce, Lionel moved away and took refuge in a hotel, while Jeffrey's mother also decided to leave home, taking her youngest son, David, with her and leaving Jeffrey alone. Just a few weeks after graduating, he began to explore his fantasies more freely. Jeffrey's fantasies began to take shape in a disturbing way. He often thought about a young man he had met while playing sports on his way home. This man frequently jogged in the evenings, shirtless, and Jeffrey found himself drawn to him. Jeffrey then imagined a scenario where he would hide in the bushes, and when the man passed by, Jeffrey would attack him and take him home. However, on the day, Jeffrey decided to make this fantasy a reality. The young man did not show up for his usual jog. Another fantasy that Jeffrey cherished was picking up a hitchhiker and taking him home. In this scenario, they would share an intimate moment and eventually live together in harmony. This fantasy became a reality in 1978 when Jeffrey was driving down the road and spotted a young hitchhiker who fit his ideal type. Jeffrey stopped and offered the young man a ride in his car. The young man, eager to go to the summer music festival, accepted Jeffrey's invitation to have a beer at his house first. His name was Stephen Hicks, and he had just turned 18. They returned to Jeffrey's house together after drinking a few beers. Stephen asked Jeffrey to fulfill his promise to take him to the festival. Jeffrey hesitated, and an argument ensued. Eventually, Stephen decided to leave, which escalated the situation. In a fit of rage, Jeffrey hit Stephen with a dumbbell, causing him to fall to the floor, unconscious. In a panic, Jeffrey strangled Stephen until he stopped breathing. Jeffrey then processed Stephen's body, placing it in 5 black trash bags. He loaded the bags into his car and drove off to find a place to dispose of them. Jeffrey began to drive erratically and out of his lane. The patrolman saw Jeffrey and asked him why he was driving like that. Jeffrey confided in the officer about his struggles with insomnia and his parents' recent divorce. Expressing feelings of hopelessness about his life, he remained polite and calm throughout the conversation. When the officer asked about the car, he explained that it was full of trash and that he was looking for a place to properly dispose of it. Jeffrey made a good impression on the officer, who asked him to return home. Jeffrey complied and returned to his house with the trash bags containing Stephen's body. He eventually hid the bags in the basement. The next day, he continued to process Stephen's body. Attempting to crush the bones, he then scattered them in various locations behind the house. In the days that followed, Jeffrey paid attention to newspapers and news reports, hoping to find any updates on the missing man. However, he found none. He had committed a serious crime, but it was still a secret. This prompted him to repeat his crime. A week after Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, left home, Lionel found his son living alone and increasingly anxious. He encouraged Jeffrey to find a job, but Jeffrey showed little interest instead. He spent his days drinking. To help, Lionel took him to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and arranged sessions with psychologists. Lionel encouraged Jeffrey to pursue his studies at Ohio University. Although Jeffrey did not outright refuse, he continued to drink and think about Stephen's murder. In the following months, he donated blood in exchange for money to buy alcohol. By the end of the semester, his academic difficulties led to his expulsion from the university. However, Lionel was determined and convinced Jeffrey to enlist. Believing that military discipline could have a positive impact on him, Jeffrey complied and successfully passed the selection process. His passion for medical care took him to San Antonio, Texas, where he trained to become a military medic. Allowing him to gain a deeper understanding of human anatomy, Jeffrey eventually found his passion in his work. After 6 months, he had changed dramatically. Military physical training not only improved his physique, but also made him more sociable. For the first time, Lionel witnessed his son smile, although not while on leave. After completing his training, Jeffrey was deployed to a base in Germany. Unfortunately, his struggles with alcohol were not resolved, and when the authorities learned of the problem, he was discharged from the military upon returning to the United States. Jeffrey chose to distance himself from his father instead of going home. He settled in Miami, where he rented a hotel room and found work at a diner. At first, his life seemed okay, but it quickly became unstable. Jeffrey drank more and soon found himself unable to afford a hotel room, forcing him to sleep on the beach. Realizing that he could not continue like this, he decided to ask his father for financial help. Lionel, understanding that giving his son money might cause him to drink more, Lionel bought Jeffrey a ticket home instead, determined not to give up. Lionel committed to helping his son find a better path forward. Lionel picked Jeffrey up from the airport. Jeffrey greeted him with a bright smile, which initially led Lionel to believe that his son was simply happy to see him. However, it soon became clear that Jeffrey had consumed a significant amount of alcohol before the flight. Faced with this reality, Lionel decided that the best course of action would be to send Jeffrey to live with his grandmother in Milwaukee. During his time with her, Jeffrey matured considerably. He developed a deep respect for his grandmother, who, by many accounts, was the only person he felt truly close to. Jeffrey helped her with various chores around the house and even attended church with her. During the first few weeks, Jeffrey began reading the Bible, which helped him alleviate some of his negative thoughts. However, he still struggled with his fantasies. One day, he stole a male mannequin from a clothing store and hid it in his closet. He saw the mannequin as the perfect companion because it never rejected him, made no demands, and inspired him. However, one day, his grandmother discovered the mannequin and was horrified. She insisted that Jeffrey leave the house, but he calmed her down by promising to get rid of it one day. While sitting in the library, a man approached Jeffrey and handed him a note instructing him to meet in the men's room. Although Jeffrey chose not to accept the invitation, the incident sparked something within him, and after 9 years, his repressed desires resurfaced. In 1985, Jeffrey frequented the sauna, looking for men to satisfy his desires. When he found someone who interested him, he would invite them out for a drink. However, he would secretly put sleeping pills in their drinks. When the victim passed out, Jeffrey would lie down next to them. After one of his victims was poisoned and hospitalized, Jeffrey was banned from the club he frequented. Despite this, he continued to seek abuse partners in other bars and clubs. He preferred muscular young men and did not care about their skin color or hair color. In November 1987, Jeffrey met a man named Stephen Twomey, a dancer and waiter from Michigan. They fell in love and decided to spend some time alone together. They rented a room at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Jeffrey offered Stephen a cocktail that had been spiked with sleeping pills. When Jeffrey woke up the next morning, he found bruises on Stephen Twomey's forearms and chest, along with blood coming from his mouth. Jeffrey did not remember killing Stephen and could not believe it had happened. However, he was in the same room as the corpse, which prompted him to quickly leave the hotel, cross the street, and buy a suitcase. He returned to the hotel, placed Stephen's body in the suitcase, paid the bill in the lobby, and called a taxi. A hotel employee helped Jeffrey carry the suitcase, which was so heavy that the employee jokingly asked if there was a body inside. Jeffrey replied, "Yes," and they both laughed. Unaware that the employee was helping to dispose of a body, Jeffrey then went to his grandmother's house with the suitcase and secretly took it to the basement. He began to process Stephen Twomey's body. He placed it in trash bags and then moved the bags containing the body into the trash. Several months later, Stephen Twomey's relatives filed a missing persons report after he was last seen the night he met Jeffrey while working as a waiter, although police initially believed that Stephen had simply left. His family did not accept this explanation. They had been unable to contact him, and his belongings were still in his house. However, the investigation stalled, and there was no explanation for Stephen Twomey's disappearance. After not being held accountable for his actions, Jeffrey increasingly embraced his dark desires and became a serial killer over the next 5 years. He committed multiple murders on his free nights and weekends. After 3 months of searching for new victims, Jeffrey met a 14-year-old boy at a bus stop near a club. Jeffrey approached the boy and offered to pay him $50 to sleep with him, and unfortunately, the boy accepted the offer. They took the bus to Jeffrey's grandmother's house, where she was sleeping, while they went down to the basement. There, Jeffrey drugged the boy and then strangled him. He became more perverted, abusing the boy while he was dead as the body began to decompose. Jeffrey treated it like those of his previous victims. He began to dispose of the body of James Dox Tater. He packed the body in plastic bags and threw it in the trash. The victim's name was James Dox Tater, according to the Tampa Bay Times. James had run away from home 2 days earlier to escape his abusive stepfather, although his mother filed a complaint. Police showed little interest in finding him. Jeffrey's fourth victim was Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old Hispanic man. They met outside a gay bar called Phoenix. Jeffrey lured Richard to his grandmother's house, promising to pay him to spend the night in the basement. Jeffrey drugged Richard with sleeping pills, then strangled him with a leather strap and began abusing him after he was dead. After satisfying his desires, Jeffrey put the body parts in garbage bags, which were picked up by a garbage service the next day. Richard's family urged the police to investigate his disappearance, but the officers believed he had left home voluntarily. However, Richard's sister believed otherwise and convinced her relatives to hire a private investigator. Richard's father, who worked at a golf course, spent all his savings on the investigator. But it turned out that the investigator was a fraud. Meanwhile, Richard's mother prayed daily for his safe return. Jeffrey's grandmother asked him to move out because she was fed up with him. He was no longer the grandson she used to go to church with. His drinking, his habit of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the stench from the basement and garage were too much for her to bear. As a result, Jeffrey had to find a new place to live. He rented a small apartment where he stayed for a while as he prepared for his next victim. Jeffrey then found his fifth potential victim, a 13-year-old boy who came to his apartment. They met on the street, where Jeffrey offered to pay the boy in exchange for allowing him to take pictures. However, when Jeffrey tried to touch the boy got scared and ran away. The 13-year-old then informed his parents about the incident, and they reported it to the police. As a result, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with harassment. He received a 1-year sentence at the Milwaukee Correctional Center. Although he was allowed to leave during the day to go to work, he was required to return to the facility at night just days before his sentence began. Jeffrey met his sixth victim, a 24-year-old man named Anthony Sears. On March 25, 1989, Jeffrey and Anthony met at a bar, and when the bar closed, they decided to spend the night together. They could not go to Anthony's house because his girlfriend was there. Jeffrey asked a friend to drive them to his grandmother's house. When they arrived, he took Anthony to the basement and committed his usual act. However, this time was different. After disposing of the body, he put it in several different garbage bags. Some of Anthony's remains he threw in the trash, while others he kept in his locker at work. During Jeffrey's trial, his lawyer successfully reduced his sentence to just 10 months in a rehabilitation center. Jeffrey's father wrote to the judge, asking that Jeffrey be allowed to attend an alcohol treatment program while incarcerated. However, the judge received the letter too late, and Jeffrey was released without undergoing any rehabilitation. After his release, Jeffrey upgraded the security in his apartment by installing cameras and an alarm system. On June 24, 1990, Jeffrey went on a killing spree while at one of his favorite bars. He noticed a man named Raymond Smith. Jeffrey drugged Raymond and abused him before killing him. Just a month after killing Raymond, Jeffrey targeted another victim, 27-year-old Edward Smith. Edward was lured in with an offer of $100 to have his picture taken. With Jeffrey pretending to be a photographer, Edward was last seen alive talking to Jeffrey at a club. In September 1990, Jeffrey murdered his 8th victim, 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Ernest was attractive and healthy, and he worked as a dancer. He agreed to pose for photos in Jeffrey's apartment for $50, which put him in a dangerous situation. Jeffrey followed his usual pattern, plied Ernest with a mixture of alcohol and strong drugs. And this time, however, Ernest woke up before Jeffrey could strangle him. Resulting in a struggle, Jeffrey attacked Ernest with a knife. After killing him, Jeffrey disposed of the body as he had done with his other victims. But this time, he took a more disturbing step. Not only did he handling of the body, he also put it in the freezer for later use. The foul smell emanating from Jeffrey's apartment caused complaints from neighbors. To explain the smell, Jeffrey claimed that his meat refrigerator had broken down. To solve the problem, he bought a large plastic barrel and filled it with acid to destroy the body parts. Although he was able to remove some of the evidence, the smell remained. It seemed that Jeffrey did not care about the complaints from the neighbors. On September 24, 1990, Jeffrey continued his killing spree, targeting David Thomas, a 22-year-old man whom he had met at the Grand Avenue Mall. Jeffrey convinced David to return to his apartment for a few drinks, offering additional money if he posed for a photo. After giving David a drink laced with sedatives, Jeffrey found himself not attracted to him, but was afraid David would be angry when he found out he was drugged. As a result, Jeffrey strangled him. He took photos of handling of the body disposal and kept those photos for unknown reasons. Jeffrey stopped killing for 4 months. He met his next victim in February 1991. This victim, his 10th, was 17-year-old Curtis Straughter. Curtis had just lost his job as a nurse and was looking forward to becoming a model and attending college. They met at a bus stop, tragically. This was not the end of Jeffrey's list of victims. Just 2 months later, he met Errol Lindsay, a 19-year-old boy who was also lured by the promise of money to take pictures. The next victim was 31-year-old Tony Hughes. Tony, who had lost his hearing as a child due to medication, was cheerful and sociable. He loved to dance and made friends easily. Tony was last seen on May 24, 1991, at a club. That night, Jeffrey invited him to his house, where he continued his killing spree. Unfortunately, Tony's body was left in Jeffrey's apartment for several days before being dumped in a dumpster on May 26, 1991. A tragic chapter unfolded when Jeffrey met Conorak Synthesophone, a 14-year-old Laotian teenager. Conorak was the younger brother of a previous victim who had escaped from Jeffrey. The situation was heartbreaking. Conorak had accepted money from Jeffrey to help his family, who was struggling financially and faced challenges Due to their limited English skills, Konarak had been drugged by Jeffrey. After ensuring that Konarak was unconscious, Jeffrey left to buy alcohol, planning to strangle him upon his return. However, Konarak regained consciousness and escaped from the apartment. He wandered the streets until he encountered two girls, who were the nieces of Jeffrey Dahmer's next-door neighbor. The girls saw Konarak, who was injured, and they called 911 for help. The police, along with paramedics, rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found Konarak lying in the middle of the road. They picked him up and placed him in a nearby building. When they began asking him questions, Jeffrey turned around, claiming that Konarak was his boyfriend, with whom he had just had a fight, and that he had been drinking heavily. The police accepted Jeffrey's explanation. The two girls begged the police to check Jeffrey's identification, but they refused. They urged the officers to listen to them. Pointing out the bruises and cuts on Konarak's body, the girls insisted that they knew the boy and that he was definitely a minor. The officers rudely told the girls to be quiet and even threatened to arrest them for trying to help Konarak. Had the officers checked Jeffrey's identification, they would have discovered that he was on mandatory parole for a previous conviction for molesting Konarak's brother. Instead, both officers assisted Jeffrey in taking Konarak back to his apartment, and one officer even placed him on the sofa. Once inside the apartment, the officers detected a foul odor, which Jeffrey explained was from a broken refrigerator filled with rotting meat that he had not disposed of. Surprisingly, the officers did not find anything suspicious. Jeffrey even showed them pictures of Konarak that he had taken earlier. Another alarming detail that the police overlooked was the body of Tony Hughes in the bedroom. The police left the scene, but the two girls called them back to check if they needed to identify themselves as witnesses. Unfortunately, the police dismissed their concerns, claiming it was just a disagreement between two adult partners. When Jeffrey was left alone with Konarak, he decided to inject hydrochloric acid into the boy's head. He did this to create a zombie. He had always dreamed of having a companion who would obey his every command without question. These experiments ultimately led to Konarak's death. Jeffrey then handling of the body. Konarak's, the next victim added to Jeffrey's list, was 20-year-old Matt Turner, whom he met at a bus stop. Matt accepted Jeffrey's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a professional photo shoot at his apartment. Jeffrey drugged, strangled, and handling of the body Matt's. On July 5, 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger became Jeffrey's victim. They met at a bar in Chicago, and Jeremiah went to Jeffrey's apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him. Jeffrey then drugged Jeremiah and injected boiling water into his skull twice, causing him to fall into a coma and die 2 days later. Oliver Lacey, a 23-year-old athlete, accepted an offer for a photo shoot for money and accompanied Jeffrey to his apartment. There, Lacey and Jeffrey engage in intimate activities. Just 4 days later, on July 19, Jeffrey lured 25-year-old Joseph Bradehoff to his apartment. Joseph was strangled and laid out on Jeffrey's bed, covered with a sheet. For 2 days, on July 21, Jeffrey began handling of the body Joseph's. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey approached a group of 3 friends at a bar while they were drinking. He introduced himself as a photographer and paid $100 to anyone to pose for photos. Only one, a 32-year-old homeless man named Tracy Edwards, agreed. Jeffrey invited Tracy to his apartment and mixed him a cocktail, which he offered to all of his victims. However, Tracy, being as smart as he was, noticed a strange taste in the drink and decided not to finish it. Jeffrey then attempted to be intimate with Tracy, but Tracy repeatedly refused. Eventually, Jeffrey handcuffed one of Tracy's hands, leading to a struggle. During the fight, Jeffrey grabbed a knife, but Tracy fought back, hit Jeffrey, and escaped from the apartment. On the street, Tracy spotted a police car and informed the officers about the incident. They accompanied him to Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey tried to prevent the police from searching his place, but it was extremely dirty, and a strong stench filled the air while going through boxes in Jeffrey's apartment. The police discovered gruesome photos of his victims. It was clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. This was the beginning of the end for Jeffrey Dahmer. The police searched the apartment and arrested Jeffrey. Inside the refrigerator, they discovered numerous human body parts. In a container filled with acid, they found more human body parts. They also found photographs that not only revealed the bodies of the victims, but also documented the many abuses Jeffrey had committed against them. Jeffrey felt relieved that he no longer had to hide such a secret that he had kept for so many years. When he realized that he would have to face the consequences of his actions, he chose to confess everything. His confession took 6 weeks to complete and spanned 159 pages, detailing every aspect of his crimes, from his first murder to his last victim. Jeffrey explained that at first, he just wanted to lie next to the men he had kidnapped. But over time, his desires became increasingly horrific. He admitted that the only way to keep his victims with him forever was to kill them. Jeffrey Dahmer claimed that he did not want to kill. Instead, he wanted a zombie-like companion that he could control indefinitely. Psychologists who worked with Jeffrey concluded that his motive was not abuse, but a desire for control. After Jeffrey's detailed confession, the court no longer had to prove his guilt. It only needed to determine his sanity. At the time, Wisconsin did not have the death penalty. If he were found insane, he would have been committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. Although there was a possibility that he could be released in the future, the trial began on January 30, 1992, due to the serious nature of the case. Many security measures were taken in the courtroom, including the installation of bulletproof glass throughout the 2-week trial. Jeffrey sat silently, listening to arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. Jeffrey's defense strategy was simple. They did not try to argue that he was not guilty of murder. Instead, the defense sought to have him hospitalized for treatment. They argued that he needed psychological and psychiatric help, asserting that normal people do not commit such heinous acts. The prosecution, in contrast, argued that, under Wisconsin law, a person who remembers his actions and understands what they have done should be considered sane. A few days later, a verdict was reached. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional life sentence for a 1978 murder, bringing the total to 16 life sentences. Jeffrey expressed deep remorse for the pain he had caused the families of his victims and acknowledged their anger toward him. He was then sent to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Jeffrey rediscovered his faith in God. Recalling the times he had gone to church with his grandmother, he asked a local priest to baptize him, and the priest agreed. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo DeRuthi, attacked Jeffrey, who was hospitalized but survived then. In November of that year, another inmate, Christopher Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence, attacked him. Christopher had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Christopher disliked Jeffrey, who described himself as religious, a characterization that Christopher found insincere. In November, Christopher, Jeffrey, and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, who was serving time for murdering his wife, cleaned the inmate gym. They were also required to clean the locker room and restrooms used after gym class when they were left unsupervised. Christopher seized the opportunity to carry out his dangerous plan to attack both Jeffrey and Jesse. First, he followed Jeffrey into the locker room, where Jeffrey was cleaning. He took a steel bar from the weight room and struck Jeffrey in the head several times. He then attacked Jesse in the same manner. Afterward, he left the gym and called security. Both Jeffrey and Jesse were taken to the hospital, but Jeffrey died en route. His death was confirmed upon arrival at the hospital. Jesse remained in a coma for 2 days before being taken off life support. In accordance with Jeffrey's wishes, his body was cremated, and his ashes were divided among his parents. When details of Jeffrey's crimes became public, protests erupted, focused on the fact that two police officers who handed over a boy named Konarak Synthesomphone to Jeffrey were not prosecuted. The two police officers did not check the identity of the boy or Jeffrey and did not search Jeffrey's apartment. After the trial, the two police officers involved were suspended from duty. They later appealed the dismissal, and the judge ruled in their favor, and awarding each $55 in compensation after being reinstated. Both officers resumed their careers. Additionally, after the investigation was completed, the building where Jeffrey Dahmer lived was demolished in the hope of helping people forget the horrific events that occurred there. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Robert Denton. Bristol is a city in Sullivan County, Tennessee, United States. The surrounding landscape is dominated by hills and forests. Among the trees are scattered homes, many of which sit on secluded plots of land, slightly removed from the roads below. At approximately 5:45 p.m. on August 29, 2015, a local homeowner, who worked the night shift and was asleep at the time, was awakened by the sound of gunfire. He recounted stepping out onto his porch, looking around, and then heading back inside. He initially thought everything was normal since there was a hunting site nearby. However, he found it strange that this time the gunfire was rapid and stopped abruptly. Another local resident was in his backyard when the shooting began. He said he heard 10 to 12 shots followed by shouting, with the entire incident lasting less than a minute. After the sound of gunfire stopped, he saw a man running down the driveway of a neighboring house, where the driveway met the main road. The trees cleared, making the scene visible. The man attempted to get into a car to escape, but his pursuer was close behind. A few more shots rang out before the car sped off down the road. That evening, 19-year-old Robert Denton called 911 after being attacked in his left arm. Despite his injury, he managed to drive to a neighbor's house to contact emergency services. Robert reported that his grandmother, mother, and stepfather had been attacked within 5 minutes. Police arrived and began searching for the shooter. Soon, the narrow rural road was filled with ambulances. A medical helicopter landed in a field near the scene to take the surviving victims to Johnson City Medical Center. Inside the home, officers found two women dead: Lena Rose, 57, and her daughter, Toshia Milhorn, 39. Toshia's husband, James Milhorn, was found unconscious on the porch with severe injuries. He was taken to hospital but later died. At the time of the shooting, 6 children were in the house. 5 were siblings, and the 6th was a visiting friend. A 7-year-old girl sustained non-life-threatening injuries, and none of the other children were harmed. Toshia and James had been married for about 4 years. Both also had children from previous marriages. James worked as a paramedic and firefighter for several agencies. He enjoyed restoring old cars and doing mechanical work in his free time. Toshia and James were remembered as loving, funny, and cherished by their family, friends. Those who knew them were left shocked and confused as to why anyone would want to harm them. The property where this tragedy occurred belonged to Toshia's parents, Curtis and Lena Rose, who had been married for 40 years. Toshia and her husband had moved in temporarily, intending to stay for just a few months while completing work on their trailer at the crime scene. Curtis said that, after he found out relatives were attacked, Robert had already run out of the house and was fleeing down the driveway, believing his grandson was responsible for the murders. Curtis chased after Robert while running. Curtis called emergency services and caught up with Robert at the end of the driveway. He fired one attack that hit Robert's car window and another that struck Robert in the arm, despite being wounded. Robert managed to flee in his car when the police arrived. Curtis directed them toward Robert, but by then, Robert had already disappeared behind the house's back door. Near the laundry room leading to the kitchen, a rifle and a camouflage jacket were found on the ground, which was identified as the murder weapon. 7 shell casings were recovered at the scene, matching the ammunition Robert had with him when emergency responders transported him to the hospital. Investigators determined that Robert had purchased this weapon at a military surplus store. A few weeks prior to the incident, a manhunt was launched for Robert. He then was arrested and charged with 6 counts, 3 for first-degree murder and 3 additional charges, 2 for aggravated assault and 1 for reckless endangerment. In February 2016, Robert pleaded not guilty after considering all factors, including his age at the time of the crime. The death penalty was removed. If he were to be convicted of the murders, Robert was held on $1 million bail. No charges were filed against Curtis, as law enforcement concluded that his account was consistent with the physical evidence. Curtis's version of events was accepted by law enforcement and became the foundation of their understanding of the massacre. Robert Denton, commonly known as Seth, was primarily raised by his grandparents. His mother, Toshia, reportedly struggled with mental health issues, including bipolar disorder. And Robert himself may have faced similar challenges. He briefly joined the military, but was later discharged and returned to live with his grandparents for a time. As a young adult, Robert sought independence and moved into a local apartment with a roommate. Shortly before the murders, Robert lost his job at a fast food restaurant. He had no criminal history or known violent tendencies, according to relatives and friends. However, Robert deeply resented his mother after interviewing those close to him. Authorities believe they were able to piece together the events leading up to the tragedy. Robert reportedly drove to his grandparents' house, parking at the bottom of a steep dirt driveway at approximately 1:45 p.m. He exited the car, put on a camouflage jacket, retrieved a semi-automatic rifle, and walked up the driveway past an above-ground pool before entering the house through the back door. Once inside, he swiftly attacks all 3 victims within seconds. Police were unable to determine the exact order in which the victims were attacked. After the attacks, Robert went outside, removed the camouflage jacket, and left it next to the weapon. He then crossed the property to his grandfather's trailer, where his grandfather was working, and knocked on the window. Robert is said to have called his grandfather out, apparently to urge him to call 911. Detectives believe Robert intentionally avoided involving children or his grandfather in the attack. They suspect his primary target was Toshia, while Lena and James were likely killed because they were present and witnesses to the murder. In late 2016, during jury selection at the Sullivan County Courthouse, Robert unexpectedly disrupted the proceedings. After several hours, the judge announced a brief recess when the trial resumed. Robert had already even threatened to dismiss his attorneys. Robert's defense team presented an alternative version of events. They accused his grandfather, Curtis Rose, of committing the murders and argued that investigators had made critical mistakes, particularly by ignoring evidence pointing to Curtis as the shooter rather than Robert. They pointed out that on the day of the incident, police allegedly asked no further questions about Curtis's involvement. Deputies from the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office who spoke with Curtis at the scene similarly avoided pressing him with follow-up questions. Besides, Robert's roommate testified for the prosecution to help establish a motive. He explained to the jury that Robert had expressed deep hatred for his mother over the years. Robert had frequently threatened to kill her, though family and friends who heard these threats dismissed them as immature outbursts. rather than genuine intent. They never believed he would act on them. Another friend of Seth's also testified that a few months before the murders, he and Robert visited a military surplus store. At the store, Robert purchased 2 firearms. The store owner later confirmed the firearm purchase and verified the serial numbers. The defense argued that the strongest piece of evidence in the prosecution's case was the testimony of Curtis Rose, who had previously admitted to attacking Robert. Curtis once again recounted the events of that day. He explained that Robert had knocked on the side of the trailer to get his attention. Curtis then glanced into the room and, in a rush, ran into the house. Once inside, Curtis saw his daughter slumped unnaturally in a dining chair, covered in blood. Realizing she was dead, he desperately searched the entire house for his wife, Lena. Eventually, Curtis returned to the living room after checking the bedroom. At this point, Curtis noticed his son-in-law, James, lying on the front porch and making noises that caught his attention. He then went into the kitchen, where he found his wife dead. Sitting between the table and the refrigerator, after discovering her body, Curtis returned to the bedroom to retrieve a gun. He then got into his van and drove down to the lower part of the driveway. He admitted that, at this time, he intended to kill Robert. Robert later testified. Providing his account of the events, he explained that, on that Saturday evening, he had called his aunt to ask where his mother was living because he wanted to visit his grandfather, with whom he shared a close bond. Robert and his grandfather occasionally went to the shooting range together, so he packed 2 weapons and a large amount of ammunition into his car. His aunt assured him that his mother wasn't living at his grandfather's house, but in a trailer elsewhere. This reassured Robert, as he wanted to avoid any interaction with his mother. Knowing it would lead to an argument, confident he wouldn't encounter Toshia, Robert drove to his grandfather's house. Robert parked at the end of the driveway and carried his weapon. Intending to show it to his grandfather, they briefly discussed ammunition. And during their conversation, Robert handed the weapon to his grandfather. According to Robert, his grandfather then walked into the house with the weapon, and Robert followed. Expecting that they might check for compatible ammunition, Robert recounted that when he entered the house behind his grandfather, the latter immediately began to attack with the weapon. Robert claimed that, from his position behind Curtis, he saw his mother sitting at the table and witnessed his grandfather kill her. His grandfather suddenly snapped, prompting him to panic and flee the house. Fearing for his life, however, the defense provided no clear motive as to why Curtis would have committed the murders. The trial lasted 8 days and included nearly 200 pieces of evidence. Both Curtis's shoes and Robert's shoes were covered in blood. The testimonies of Curtis and Robert contradicted each other, however. The jury confirmed that there was a lie in the testimony, according to Robert's friend and the arms dealer. The rifle used in the murder belonged to Robert. In fact, he had brought it to the Curtis house, and Robert still had bullets when fled. The jury deliberated for 2 full days on the first day. The jurors grew so tired after 5 hours of reviewing evidence that they requested to pause for the night. When they resumed the next day, they unanimously agreed on all 6 charges in the indictment. The jury found Robert Denton guilty of first-degree murder. The jury recommended a life sentence for Robert. With no possibility of parole for at least 51 years, Robert continues to claim his innocence. He is currently serving his sentence at the Turney Center Industrial Complex in Tennessee, the Millhorn. Children are still being cared for by family members.